Congratulations, you finally have a haircut that matches your age. The note was pinned to my pillow when I jolted awake on my son's wedding day. I reached up smooth skin. My scalp burned, the sharp smell of antiseptic still hanging there. I didn't scream. I opened the safe, pulled out the envelope for a planned transfer of $22 million, and changed the game. I froze in front of the mirror in the marble-tiled bathroom. The woman staring back wasn't Beatrice Langford, the real estate CEO who built dozens of high-rises in Boston. She was someone humiliated to the core. The thick silver hair I'd cared for so carefully, my pride, was gone. All that remained was a slick, burning red, icy scalp. Tears surged, but I forced them back down. They wanted me to fall apart. They wanted me to disappear on the day I should have stood tall as the groom's mother. No, I wasn't giving Sabrina that victory. On the oak nightstand, I saw an ivory envelope with neat blue ink, so carefully written it looked fake. "Have a great day at my wedding." A crude heart at the end. The paper still carried an expensive perfume, the same scent I'd smelled 100 times on my future daughter-in-law. I didn't need to guess who did it. I took a long breath, trembling but clearer than ever. The bedroom safe was still open from last night, where I'd carefully placed the envelope holding the paperwork to transfer $22 million to Michael and Sabrina. That was the wedding gift I'd spent weeks preparing, believing it would be the final bridge to keep my son close. Now, when my fingers touched that envelope, it felt different. The paper wasn't smooth anymore. It was sharp like a blade, cutting into my palm. I gripped it, then set it back in the safe, turned the dial, and listened to the dry metal click. The decision was made. That gift was never leaving this safe. I called Avery Whitman, our longtime family attorney. He picked up after 2 rings. "Beatrice? Ready to sign off on the transfer? I've prepped everything you asked." I kept my voice steady. "Avery, put it on hold. Not a single dollar moves. And tonight, after the reception, I want you at my house. We're rewriting the entire will." Silence on the other end for a moment. "Is something wrong?" I closed my eyes. "Just one thing," I said. I finally woke up. I set the phone down and walked to the closet. I was still shaking, but a small flame had caught in my chest. Sabrina might have shaved my head, but she couldn't strip away the pride and will I'd honed for decades. I pulled a navy silk dress off the hanger, the one I bought myself for my birthday after closing a 30-story tower deal in downtown Boston. I smoothed the cool fabric and remembered that feeling of victory. I knew I'd need it today, not just as a dress, but as armor. The landline rang. I jumped. Not Michael, not Sabrina. It was Lucia, my hairstylist of over 20 years. My throat tightened, but I kept even. "Lucia, I need you right now. Bring the best wig you have. No one can know." She didn't pry. She only whispered, "I'll be there in 20 minutes." While I waited, I sat in the armchair by the window and looked out at the yard under the first snow. White flakes drifted down, covering every branch, every red brick path I'd walked thousands of times. Memories crashed in. The day I became a widow at 32. The night I buried my husband with 12-year-old Michael asleep in my arms, and I swore he would never know fear or hunger. I kept that vow for 3 decades. I worked without stopping. Dawn runs from job sites to the office, late nights reading contracts until my eyes blurred. The first apartments, then a commercial building, then a mall, every brick, every contract tied to my blood, sweat, and sleepless nights. And now, all of it stood to fall into the hands of a woman who saw me as disposable. The doorbell rang. I let Lucia in. She carried a long black box. When she saw my head, she covered her mouth. "Oh my God, Beatrice." I cut off her pity with a tight smile. "Don't ask. Just help me stand tall in front of people today." It took nearly an hour to fit a soft gray-silver wig that looked and moved like real hair. When Lucia held up the mirror, I shivered. The woman in the glass was no longer the wreck from the morning. She had the cool poise and razor gaze my counterparts in business used to respect. I recognized her Beatrice Langford, the woman who never accepted defeat. I thanked Lucia, slipped a thick envelope into her hand, and walked her out. Alone again, I opened my purse and carefully tucked in a small voice recorder. My instincts told me that today, words without proof would save no one. The clock read 10 a.m., 3 hours until the ceremony at St. Andrew's Church, one of the city's oldest. I closed my eyes and drew a deep breath. The battle started this morning the second my hand touched that bare scalp. But the ending, that would be mine to decide. I grabbed a gray wool coat and a cashmere scarf Michael gave me 10 years ago. That memory now felt like a dull knife scratching, not bleeding. I told myself, "Son, today I'll show you just how badly you misjudged your mother." When I stepped outside, Boston's cold wind slapped my face, but I didn't flinch. I pulled the collar up, adjusted the wig, and got into the car. My driver glanced at me in the rear view, ready to speak. I shook my head. I needed silence. I needed to feed the fire that had just been lit. On the way to the church, I watched people through the window, couples holding hands, families guiding small children across the street. I wondered how many of them had been betrayed by the very people they trusted most, how many had been forced to choose between love and self-respect. I knew today I wasn't fighting only for myself, but for the countless mothers used by their own children, with motherhood thrown back at them as a demand. The car stopped at the church gates. I pressed a hand to my chest and felt a strange calm, not trembling, strength rising. The strength of truth, of a woman pushed to the edge who refused to break. I opened the door, stepped out, and smiled. That smile wasn't for the crowd, or for Michael or Sabrina. It was for me, Beatrice Langford, who woke up on the most important morning of her life with a shaved head and a heart more awake than ever. I sat on the cold pew, looking up at the stained glass flickering with light, and memories rolled in. While the staff rushed flowers and candles into place, my mind slipped back to where it all began: love, loss, and the grit to build a life from nothing. I remember the day it all changed at 32. They handed me my husband Richard's death certificate, sudden heart attack on the highway. I was stunned. One minute we were talking about expanding our little office, the next I was frozen in a hospital corridor, palms over my face, hearing my 12-year-old ask, "Mom, where's Dad?" I had no answer. I pulled Michael in, held him, and silently swore he would never lack for anything. We went back to our small house outside Boston. That night I sat in an old armchair for hours, watched Michael asleep on the sofa, his young face still streaked with tears. In the dark, I understood. From now on, the weight was mine. No Richard to split bills, no shoulder to lean on. Just me and a boy who didn't yet know how to knot a tie for his school uniform. The next morning, as the sun lifted over the horizon, I put on a thin sweater, tied my hair back, and started my new job. Widowed mother turned accidental businesswoman. I had no capital, no specialized knowledge, but I had one thing I knew: I had to survive. I learned to read financial statements like a foreign language, spent hours at the public library studying real estate, land use, property management. At first the numbers spun in my head, but page by page, hope-open knowledge would be the sharp knife protecting us from poverty. Those first years were brutal. I worked from 5 a.m. until late at night. Days knocking on doors of tired old houses, pitching low-cost brokerage work. Nights bent over notes, learning market analysis, price comps, cold calling leads. Some nights I cried after another rejection, then got up at dawn to make Michael breakfast and drive him to school. I went hungry many days to save for his new math books. When he asked, "Mom, why aren't you eating with me?" I smiled. "I already ate. You go ahead." He believed me, and I doubled down. I wanted him to grow up feeling secure, not like me as a child, digging through empty cupboards for the last stale roll. 3 years later, I bought my first duplex. I remember signing the papers, my hand shaking so badly I could barely hold the pen. When I put the pen down, a new door opened. From there, it was brick by brick, unit by unit, building by building. The Langford real estate footprint started with freezing morning walks to a broker's office, hoarse throat calls, and nights lit by a desk lamp over burning eyes. Michael was different. He saw results, not the process. At 18, he was used to a new car, tuition paid, never thinking about the price of a shirt. I'd raised him like a prince and forgot to teach the prince how to wield a sword. On his college graduation day, I watched him stride across the stage, robe billowing. I thought I'd done it, turned a fatherless boy into a successful man, but deep in his eyes I saw something familiar, not gratitude, entitlement. At 25, he came to me calm as could be. "Mom, I want my own condo. You'll cover the down payment, right?" I nodded, wrote the check, asked no questions. Not the first ask and not the last. At 30, he brought Sabrina home and said flatly, "We want to do Europe nice and luxe. You'll take care of it, right?" Not a request, an order with a smile. I'd spoiled my son. I thought I was making up for losing his father too soon. In truth, I was teaching him to treat a mother's love like an endless bank. I realized too late, then Sabrina arrived and made it worse. From day one, I felt the chill in her eyes. Smooth talker, good at charming a room with travel stories, fashion, career plans. But when she looked at me, it was scrutiny. No interest in the woman who'd raised Michael. I let it slide, telling myself time would soften things. Instead, I was pushed to the margins. At family dinners, she tossed light jabs. "Mrs. Langford, don't you think that color ages you? Maybe try something fresher." Michael just laughed, nodding along like a shadow. I sat there with my salad, forcing a smile to keep the table from turning into a battlefield. Each time, another scar etched into my heart. I kept handing over money and kept my mouth shut because I was afraid of one thing: losing my son. I believed that if I was more generous, if I gave them more, maybe Michael would remember a mother's love. That's why I prepared the massive wedding gift, $22 million. To me, it was the last key, the hope of keeping me connected to Michael and helping Sabrina see I wasn't an obstacle but an ally. But this morning shattered that illusion. The shaved hair, the mocking note, everything hit like a slap that woke me up. Suddenly I could see clearly. For years I'd traded my health, youth, and self-respect to hold on to a bond that was already rotten. Sitting in the church, listening to the choir rehearse, I lightly touched the wig on my head. It was soft, hiding an ugly truth, but underneath I knew my scalp still burned. That wound was my life in miniature. A shiny surface of success with tears inside left by the people I loved most. I drew a deep breath. Only one question remained. Would I let them keep defining my worth, or would I stand up and define myself? I stayed on the dark wooden pew a moment longer, gripping an old hymnal. The chill of Street Andrews seeped through every crack, into my skin, making me shiver. On the main altar, helpers were lighting candles, their gold glow trembling up the high-arched ceiling. Everything looked beautiful, solemn, just as Sabrina wanted. But to me, that reverence was only the backdrop for a carefully staged farce. I stood and stepped into the side hall. My heels clicked softly on the stone, blending with the bridesmaids' whispers ahead. I meant to step outside for air, but then I froze. In the quiet, a familiar voice came low and urgent. It was Michael. I pressed against a large stone column carved with classical patterns, forcing my breathing to slow. My son's voice carried in a hushed echo, each word slicing the space. "Tessa, no, don't show up here now. I told you. Just wait until after the ceremony." That name stabbed my chest. Tessa Park. I'd seen her many times at Michael's office, the young secretary with quick eyes and a bright smile. I used to think she was just a dedicated assistant. Now, everything was clear as day. Michael went on, voice dropping to a whisper into the phone. After I get that money from my mother, everything will change. We won't have to hide anymore, won't have to sneak around. Just be patient a little longer." I let the hymnal fall to my lap, my hands shaking hard. Each word hit my ears like a cold blade. That money, he meant, was the wedding gift I'd planned? $22 million, the work of my lifetime, suddenly turned into a ticket for my son to run off with his mistress while he was still about to marry Sabrina. I tilted my head, heart pounding. Michael's voice came again, heavier. "You know how my mother Island, she always wants to please me, always afraid I'll go without. As soon as she signs this afternoon, we'll have it all. A fresh start, freedom, no strings." I bit my lip to keep from making a sound. My son, the boy who once cried into a pillow for his mother, now saw me as a wallet. He wasn't just betraying me, he was betraying his own wedding, turning those vows into a joke. In that moment, I heard footsteps rush through the hall. Michael lowered his voice. "I have to go. Keep it quiet. After the honeymoon, I'll take care of everything. Tessa, trust me." Then the call cut off, leaving a thick silence. I slipped back into the shadows, pretending to study a flower arrangement in the corner. A few staffers hurried by, paying me no mind. Michael stepped out from behind the column, straightened his jacket, a flicker of strain crossing his face before he smiled, the smile everyone expects from a happy groom. But I had seen, and I had heard. I returned to the pew and sat like a dutiful churchgoer. In my purse, the tiny recorder glowed red, quietly storing every lie Michael had said. My chest ached, but something inside had hardened. I no longer clung to the fantasy that money would mend a mother-son bond. I knew I'd just gotten my first piece of evidence, the weapon to keep me from the trap my son and daughter-in-law were setting. I closed my eyes and steadied my breath. The organ swelled in rehearsal, urgent and then lingering. People would see me this morning as a proud mother waiting for her son to walk the aisle. But only I knew that, from the moment I heard that call, my heart had shifted from hurt to resolve. When I opened my eyes, colored light from the stained glass fell across my hands in bands of green, red, purple, and gold. I stared at it and thought, maybe God is showing me the way, not the road of tears, but of truth. I tightened my grip on the purse where the warm evidence rested. And I promised myself, when the moment comes, I won't tremble like I did in the mirror this morning. I will be Beatrice Langford, the woman who isn't afraid and who is ready to expose everything. I stayed on the pew, working my breath back into rhythm after what I'd just overheard. A cold, metallic ringing kept sounding inside me, a warning that the truth wasn't done. I knew Michael had another woman, knew he was only waiting for the money to leave Sabrina. But in my bones, I felt Sabrina wasn't innocent either. She'd never bothered to hide that condescending look she saved just for me. I wanted to know what she truly thought, wanted to see my future daughter-in-law's real face, not the glossy one she wore. I rose and slipped down the corridor toward the bridal prep room. The polished marble floor reflected my steps. At the far end, the door sat half open, white light spilling out along with bouncy music and the sharp laughter of several women. I stopped just outside, heart racing, but my feet refused to move away. Through the crack, Sabrina's voice rang out, clear as day high, confident, brimming with triumph. "You know what? In just a few hours I'll have the entire fortune in my hands. $22 million, and by law I get half." Michael's so naive he has no idea. Laughter broke out. I went rigid. My fingers dug into the doorframe, my palms ice cold. Sabrina kept going, lower now but edged with malice. "And after that, I'm filing for divorce. I've already contacted an attorney. I don't need to stay with Michael forever. With that money, I can start fresh, freer, and more comfortable." A bridesmaid giggled. "What about the mother-in-law? She's a handful, acts like the house is hers." Sabrina dropped her voice, cold as ice. "Don't worry. Once the money's in, I'll push Michael to put her in a high-end nursing home. Park her there, let someone else handle her. Once she's out of the house and the company, she won't have a say in anything." The room burst into shrill laughter, crisp as blades slicing my skin. I shook all over, but not from fear. It was anger, rising from the marrow, a firestorm burning away the weakness of my morning. I stood there, frozen, until I realized I was crushing the recorder in my purse. The red light kept blinking, faithfully catching every word, every bitter laugh. I closed my eyes for a second and knew I'd just gripped a double-edged knife. One edge to protect, the other to strike back. I eased away without a sound. My heart hammered like it would explode, but my steps held steady. I knew if I stayed 1 minute longer, I'd charge in and scream in Sabrina's face. I didn't. Life had taught me enough. Big battles aren't won by hot anger, but by patience and planning. Back in the main sanctuary, no one noticed I'd been gone. Guests were gathering. Chatter filled the air. I smiled and greeted them, burying the storm twisting inside me. In the colored glass, I caught my reflection, a silver-haired woman in a navy dress, deep red lipstick. No one knew that only a few steps away I'd just heard my future daughter-in-law call me an old woman who needs to be locked away. I sat, hands loosely folded. Inside my purse, the recording had become a living piece of proof. I pictured it playing for the crowd, Sabrina's smug laughter echoing, her face going pale as she realized everything was out. The thought gave me an odd, cooling calm. Sabrina wanted me erased, tucked away in some distant nursing home. Michael wanted to drain the money and run with his lover. Both thought I was weak, old, easily beaten. But that contempt gave me strength. I would turn their trap into my launch pad. In that instant, I knew the morning's humiliation had become a pivot point. From the shaved scalp, the spiteful note, the false vows I overheard behind the column, to the vicious laughter in the bridal room, together they formed an indictment I didn't need to add a single word to. All I had to do was wait for the right moment. I drew a deep breath and looked toward the altar. Candlelight washed the Virgin's face. Quietly, I told myself, they think I've lost. I have no idea I've just begun. I straightened my shawl, sat tall, and let a gentle smile return. Anyone passing by would see only a kind, proud mother of the groom on a big day. But I knew, behind that smile, a double-edged blade was ready, and when I drew it, none of them would see it coming. The church bells pealed, each round rolling through the space like a familiar refrain. Guests took their seats. White-draped pews were dotted with deep red roses. I sat in the front row on the groom's side, fingers lightly holding the small clutch on my lap. All eyes turned to the back, where Sabrina was about to enter on her father's arm. The big doors opened. She appeared in a white French lace gown, the train nearly touching the steps. Murmurs and gasps spread, camera flashes popped. Sabrina beamed, gliding forward like the heroine in a fairy tale. I watched her and couldn't help recalling the cruel words from the dressing room minutes ago. Behind that shimmer was a calculating heart, and I was the only one here who knew it. Michael waited at the end of the aisle, sharp in a black tuxedo with a crisp white tie. His smile beamed, but to me it was only a mask. I heard his whisper on the phone in my head, "After I get that money from my mother, everything will change." The image of the boy who once gripped my hand, shaky on toddler legs, was gone. In front of me stood a man who'd sold off both conscience and kinship. The ceremony began. The priest's opening words were steady and solemn, echoing under the high vault. I tried to focus, but every "marriage is a sacred union" landed like a taunt. I glanced around, teary eyes, tender smiles, people sure they were witnessing true love. Only I knew they were watching a carefully staged production. When it came time for the vows, Michael turned to Sabrina, his voice low and steady. "I promise to love you, respect you, share every joy and sorrow with you, and be by your side for life." I bit my lip and listened, every word carved into the morning's memory like a blade. He promised fidelity, yet just hours earlier he'd been whispering to another woman. He promised a future together, while planning in his head to leave his wife once he got the money. Then it was Sabrina's turn. She lifted her face, eyes shining as if full of love. "I promise to stand by you, care for you, face every challenge together, and keep this love forever." I almost laughed. Her vows were pretty as a poem, but in my head I still heard the chill of her words, "I'll file for divorce." After that, the mother-in-law goes to a nursing home. That scheming tone and her glowing face were so opposite it made my skin crawl. When the priest asked, "Does anyone object to this marriage?" For a second I wanted to stand and shout that the whole ceremony was a lie, but I clenched my hands and held back. Not yet. The trap I'd set needed time, and that big audience was exactly the witness I wanted when the truth came out. I took a deep breath and gave a faint smile, the kind a mother would wear on a big day. Finally, the bells rang bright, and the priest declared them husband and wife. Michael leaned down to kiss Sabrina, and the church burst into applause. I clapped too slow, firm, smiling the whole time. On the outside, I looked like any proud mother. Inside, every round of applause only confirmed it. Everything I'd just seen was an empty show. As the couple turned to walk out to the cheerful music, I rose and followed, my eyes on the white train and the glossy tuxedo. They thought they'd already won, that I was just a mother pushed aside. But I knew this. The more perfect this ceremony looked, the harder their fall would be. I brushed my hand over my purse, where the recorder was safe. The evidence was enough to expose it all. I pictured Michael's face when he realized he'd been found out, Sabrina's panic when she heard her own voice ring out before a crowd. A strange calm settled over me. People poured out of the church toward the lavishly decorated reception hall. White flowers stretched everywhere. Champagne sparkled. Music pulsed. Guests laughed, toasted, raised their glasses. I moved among them, composed, smiling as I greeted familiar faces. No one saw that behind my calm mask, I was holding a storm ready to break. In my head, every step was set. I'd wait until the room drew together, until everyone lifted their glasses to listen to me speak. Then the lies would be dragged into the light, and no one could deny them. I took my seat at the front table under warm golden lights and quietly watched Michael and Sabrina sit side by side, holding hands, smiling at guests. It moved many people. To me, it was just makeup and masks covering rot. I breathed in, slow and deep, and told myself, let them enjoy their last moments of glory. After that, the stage is mine. The music softened, and the murmur of conversation faded. The chandelier lights pooled into a bright circle over the head table where Michael and Sabrina Saturday. My son grinned wide, his face flushed from wine and self-satisfaction. Sabrina matched him, glowing like a bride who had just grabbed her dream. The MC gently announced, "And now please welcome Beatrice, the groom's mother, to share a few words on this special day." Heads turned, expectant eyes landed on me. My heart tightened for a beat, then steadied. This was the moment I'd prepared for since I walked into the ceremony. I stood and slowly lifted a glass of champagne. Chairs scraped, toasts hushed. All eyes rose. I smiled the smile of a proud mother while the storm gathered. First, thank you all for being here to celebrate with our family. For me, this moment is sacred, because I get to see my son step into a new chapter of his life. Applause rippled. I paused, took a small sip, set the glass down. My voice dropped, slow but clear. For 33 years, I've lived by a promise. Since my husband passed, I swore I would protect Michael with everything I had, give my son a full life, and never let him face the want I once knew. A few soft ohs rose from nearby tables. Some older guests nodded, warm-eyed. I let it sit, then continued, and today I plan to give my son and his new wife a wedding gift, a substantial one. $22 million, the savings of my lifetime, the result of decades of work. The room stirred. I heard the surprised murmurs, a few gasps. Michael squeezed Sabrina's hand, his face tightening slightly as he forced a smile. Sabrina's eyes lit, her lips curled. I drew a deep breath, lifted my head, and shifted tone. But there's something life has taught me. Not every sacrifice is valued, and not everyone deserves the gift you give. The air dipped. Curious looks turned toward me. Michael leaned forward, ready to speak, but I raised a hand to stop him. I pulled a small recorder from my purse and set it on the table. The red light blinked on. Before I decide, I think everyone should hear a few truths. Silence fell. I pressed play. Michael's voice filled the quiet. After I get that money from my mother, everything will change. We won't have to hide anymore. Just be patient a little longer. The audio was so clear, a few mouths fell open. Michael blanched and cut in. Mom, this is a misunderstanding. I looked him straight in the eye, calm but firm. A misunderstanding? Then where did these words come from? Whose mouth, Michael? Noise rose. Guests whispered. Sabrina looked at her husband, eyes wide with alarm, then tried to cover with a stiff smile. I didn't give them time. I hit the next clip. You know how my mother island. She always wants to please me. As soon as she signs this afternoon, we'll have everything. A fresh start, freedom, no strings. When it ended, the room erupted like a kicked beehive. Michael stammered, sprang up. It was just a joke. Don't take it the wrong way. I narrowed my eyes, cutting through him. A joke? Joking about betraying a marriage? Joking about treating your mother like a wallet? Michael went silent, sweat beading on his forehead. Sabrina tried to hold his hand. His hand shook. I turned, fixing my gaze on her. And Sabrina, you have something to explain too. I pulled a small note from my purse, the nasty line I found on my pillow that morning. Congratulations, you finally have a haircut that matches your age. Enjoy my wedding. I held it up for the nearest tables to see. You plan to erase me from this celebration by shaving my head in my sleep? A cheap, degrading stunt? Sabrina shot up, face flaming. That's not mine. You're making this up. I smiled. Cool. Really? Then why did you brag in the bridal room at noon that you'd divorce in a few months and take half the money? I heard everything. And I have witnesses if needed. The room froze. Some guests glanced at each other. Others whispered into their phones, clearly recording. Sabrina's face went white, her lips trembling without sound. I let the silence stretch, then slowly raised my glass. So, I'm canceling the $22 million gift. Neither of you deserves a penny of the money I earned with blood and tears. Conversation crashed like a wave. Michael collapsed into his chair, head down, hand over his face. Sabrina stood rigid, shaking. I ended in a level voice that carried, "The greatest wedding gift I can give today is the truth. And the truth is this: greed and betrayal never win." I set the glass down and turned to leave. Chairs scraped, voices rose, a few "oh my gods" rang out behind me. But my steps were light and steady. I was no longer the woman trembling in the mirror this morning. I was the one who stripped the masks off my son and daughter-in-law in front of everyone. In that moment, I knew I'd taken back control. And the game, from here on out, had only just begun. I left the hall with my back straight, neither rushing nor hesitating. Each step tapped evenly on the tile, like a reminder that the weight had lifted from my shoulders. Behind me, chaos still rolled, chairs dragged, people calling out the sounds of a wedding turned storm. I had just reached the grand lobby when I heard hurried footsteps. Michael rushed up and grabbed my arm. The handsome groom's polish was gone, replaced by panic and bloodshot eyes. "Mom, please, don't do this." "You misunderstood. It was all just—" I turned and met his eyes, the eyes that once made me proud, now filled with desperation. I pulled my arm free, my voice low and firm. "I've heard enough, Michael. There's no misunderstanding. he stammered for an excuse. I only said that to test her. I never meant— Enough! I cut him off, my voice ringing through the wide lobby. Don't turn betrayal into a joke. I gave my whole life for you, and this is how you repay me? Michael froze, his mouth working but no words coming out. His face twisted for a moment, anger and despair tangled together. Then, as if giving up, he dropped to his knees, hands clutching his head, and whispered, I was wrong. I didn't answer. I gave him one look and turned away. Right then, Sabrina burst out of the hall, her puffed wedding dress slowing her down, but she still lunged forward. Her face had gone pale, her makeup starting to smear, crimson lips trembling. She shrieked, voice shrill. You made that up! You ruined my wedding! Her scream drew a few curious guests outside. I stood calmly, watching her snarl like a cornered animal. Ruined it? I curled a cold smile. I only told the truth. You should thank me for showing everyone your real face sooner. Sabrina lunged, trying to snatch the paper from my hand, but an older male guest held her back just in time. His voice was hard. Sabrina, calm down. We all heard it. How are you going to deny it? She broke, down, sobbing, mascara streaking her cheeks, all her earlier haughtiness gone. In the chaos, I saw her parents step outside too. They didn't go to their daughter. They stood frozen at the door, eyes full of disappointment. Her father lowered his head, and her mother kept shaking hers, as if witnessing the worst humiliation of their lives. By then, Michael had gotten up, gaunt and sharp-faced, and snapped at Sabrina. You betrayed me too? She turned back, choking up. I just wanted a better future. Her weak excuses sank under the guests' angry whispers. Some shook their heads, others walked off without a backward glance. I looked at the two of them, and a feeling I couldn't name rose in me, not joy, not gloating, just relief that the truth was finally out. I took a few more steps toward the exit. But behind me, Michael ran after me again, this time his voice not frantic but desperate. Mom, please don't abandon me. I know I was wrong. Please give me one more chance. I'll change. I stopped, turned my back to him so he couldn't see the tears on my cheeks. Then I answered, slow but firm, Michael, I've given you chances your whole life. You chose to throw them all away. Now you have to live with the consequences. I didn't wait for his reply. I kept walking, leaving behind the choking sobs of my only son. Outside the hall, the decorated cars still lined up, flowers still bright. But no one wanted photos anymore. Guests drifted off, the air heavy like smoke clinging to the walls. I could feel it, this dream wedding had collapsed in just a few minutes. An old friend, Helen, hurried after me and took my hand. She whispered, Beatrice, you did the right thing. They needed to be exposed. I nodded lightly and said nothing more. Back in the car, I settled into the back seat and looked through the window. In a final glimpse, I saw Michael standing stunned in the lobby while Sabrina sobbed and shoved at people. The scene looked like a warped painting of wedded bliss. I closed my eyes and told myself that today's storm was only the beginning. I knew the aftershocks would keep coming. They would come to me begging or raging. But I was ready now. I wasn't the soft mother anymore. I was Beatrice Langford, and I'd decided to step out of the spiral of lies. The next morning I woke as pale sunlight slipped through my bedroom curtains. No more wedding clamor, no more of Michael's breathless pleading or Sabrina's furious wailing. Only quiet, and inside me, a resolve clearer than ever. I brewed a pot of coffee and poured it into my favorite white china mug with the rose print. As the warm scent filled the kitchen, I sat down and pulled out an old notebook. I opened to the first page, crammed with financial plans and figures I once treated as proof of a lifetime of sacrifice for family. But today, I took a red pen and crossed out every line, every allocation for Michael. In that moment, I realized that money, no matter how much, turns into a weapon against you when you give it to the wrong person. I had raised a dependent man who never learned to stand on his own, and now he was willing to sell out his own mother for a fake freedom. That painful truth snapped me awake, and I knew I had to act before it was too late. I called my trusted attorney, Richard Cole, who'd stood with me through real estate deals for 2 decades. His warm, deep voice carried a hint of surprise at a Sunday morning call. "Good morning, Mrs. Beatrice. I thought you'd be resting after the wedding yesterday." I gave a thin smile and said, "Yes, Richard. Yesterday was memorable, to say the least, and because of it, I want to see you today. We need to change the entire will and the transfer documents. No delays." He was quiet for a few seconds, then answered firmly, "I'll head to the office now. Can you meet me at 10 o'clock? I nodded, feeling light as if a stone had been lifted off my chest. Richard's law office sits in a red brick building downtown, about a 15-minute drive from my house. When I walked in, he was already seated, silver frames slipping down his nose, a thick file set neatly on the desk. He looked at me with sympathetic eyes. "I've heard bits about the ceremony. Sounds like you faced a major shock." I let out a long breath, then gave him a brief rundown. The shaved head, the nasty note, Michael's phone call to his lover, Sabrina's venom in the bridal room. Richard listened without interrupting, only nodding now and then. When I finished, he closed the file, face grave. "I understand. And you were right to call me. First order of business is the will. Michael will no longer be an heir. Do you want to leave anything to any other family member?" I shook my head. "No. I want everything moved to a charity fund, supporting widows and single mothers starting businesses. They truly know the value of money and they need it to rebuild." Richard jotted notes quickly, then asked, "What about the trust you set up for Michael?" I sat up straight, voice firm. "Terminate it. I want to shut off every pipeline. Not a single dollar goes to him or Sabrina." Over the next few hours, we combed through every contract and clause. I signed the new pages, feeling like I was closing an old door and opening a brighter one. Each stroke of the pen was a cut, severing Michael's dependence on me. When I signed the last document, I leaned back and took a deep breath. I felt released, as if my blood finally flowed freely again after years of being pinned down. Richard gave me a small smile. "I know this wasn't easy, but sometimes freedom comes from drawing a hard line. Mrs. Beatrice, you just did the most important thing for the rest of your life." I nodded, gratitude filling me. Back home, I walked into the living room and looked around at the paintings on the walls and the family photos from when Michael was little. For years, I kept them as proof of motherhood and sacrifice. But now I understood. Keeping them out didn't matter anymore. I wasn't erasing memories, but I wouldn't let them bind me either. I opened the safe, took out savings books and company share documents, and filed them neatly into a separate cabinet. I labeled it clearly, Freedom Fund. 3 simple words with the weight of a vow. From now on, money would no longer be the chain tying me to people who don't deserve it. It would be a tool for me and for those who truly need help. That evening, I sat on the porch, listening to waves thud in the distance. A glass of red wine glowed on the table. I looked up at a sky full of stars and felt the cool breeze pass over my scalp, where a fine layer of new hair was beginning to grow. I smiled. My reflection in the glass door no longer hurt. It felt like a symbol of a beginning. My phone rang nonstop. Michael, Sabrina, unknown numbers I guessed were relatives. I silenced it and let the screen light and go dark. My decision was made. From now on, I am no one's bank. A calm rose inside me. I knew there were more storms ahead. Michael wouldn't let go easily. Sabrina would try to maneuver. But this time, I was ready. I had the law on my side, evidence in my hand, and most of all, a new faith in myself. I took a sip of wine and whispered, "Freedom finally found me." Those first days after rewriting the will, I lived in a strange quiet. The big house, once echoing with Michael's footsteps or Sabrina's shrill laugh, held only the ticking clock and the wind slipping through the window. Instead of emptiness, I felt a rare peace. I began to rearrange my life. Financial files went into cabinets, long dusty family photos came down from the shelves. I didn't throw them out. I packed them carefully into a large box and stored it deep in the closet. I needed new space for myself. All this time, I'd been the manager, the sacrificer, the protector. I had never truly lived for me. One morning, I walked past a small shop near the beach. A simple wooden sign hung on the clear glass door. Landscape painting classes for all ages. I stood there, peering in, seeing a few women gathered around a long table, brushes in hand, focused on small canvases. Light streamed through the skylight, falling over faces lined with years but bright with excitement. My heart stirred. I remembered my dream at 18 to learn to paint buried by the weight of making a living. That afternoon I went back and signed up. The teacher's name was Marianne, a woman about my age, hair loose, voice warm and calm. She smiled when I fumbled with the brush. "No grades here, just joy. Let your hand lead your heart." The first lesson was seascapes. I looked out the window at whitecaps breaking on the sand. I laid my first stroke on the canvas, shy as if learning to write again. Then, patches of blue and silvery gray began to appear, the smell of oil paint, the feel of bristles sliding across rough fabric. It all made me feel like a child discovering the world. When I finished my first painting, awkward as it was, my eyes stung with tears. I had given myself permission to live and breathe in a new way. From then on, I went every week. I got to know other women, most of whom had weathered loss. Some were widows, some estranged from their children, others fighting illness. We sat side by side, painting and talking, like threads of different colors weaving a new cloth. I didn't feel alone anymore. Outside of class, I often carried a folding chair to the beach near my house. In the mornings, the sea was glassy blue. In the afternoons, sunlight tipped the waves and turned the water into countless shards of sparkling glass. I sat for hours, filling page after page, letting the salty wind play in my hair. The ocean never bored me, every day a new face, every moment a different shade. Like me relearning myself, changing day by day. In class, I grew especially close to a man named Samuel. He was a few years older than me, salt and pepper hair, tall and lean. He had been a structural engineer, retired early after his wife died of cancer. He chose painting to fill the emptiness. I remember the first time we sat together. He tilted his head and smiled. "I'm not good at painting, but I'm great at ruining a canvas. That's why I sit near someone who can inspire me." I laughed. That simple line eased my heart. From then on, we traded tips on color and mixing paint. One day I smeared a corner of my canvas by accident. Samuel leaned over. "Don't worry. Mistakes can become the focal point. My life is proof." We laughed, and in that laughter I realized it had been a long time since my heart felt that light. After class, Samuel often walked with me to the beach. We talked about the past, our children, and lonely days. He didn't pry or judge. He just listened with quiet respect. Once, I blurted out the story of Michael and Sabrina, the hurt I'd just been through. I worried he'd be shocked or pity me, but Samuel only nodded. "I get it. Losing trust in family can hurt more than losing money, but you're standing here, that means you chose to move forward. That's worth more than any amount of money." My throat tightened. No flowery comfort, just one short sentence and I felt seen. Little by little, I found myself again. I no longer woke up, worried about what my son needed or what my daughter-in-law would criticize. I woke to choose a new palette, to walk on the sand, to hear Samuel talk about a project he once designed. I realized life after 65 isn't an ending, it can be a beginning. One evening, as a fiery sunset spread across the horizon, I set my brush down and looked at the painting I'd just finished. In it, the sea stretched wide, the sky glowed, and in the right corner I painted a woman standing tall, silver hair blowing in the wind. That was me, but not the fragile, dependent Beatrice. It was the new Beatrice, free, at ease, smiling at her own reflection. I understood then. Art didn't just pull me out of the dark, it gave me a mirror for my soul. With the ocean, the colors, and a friend who knew how to listen, I'd begun the journey back to myself. A journey I once never dared to imagine. One early fall afternoon, coming home from class with beach sand still clinging to my shoes, I saw a familiar car by my gate, Michael's. The door was cracked open and he was in the driver's seat, looking defeated, a far cry from the polished groom he once was. I sighed, my hand pausing on the latch. I knew this moment would come sooner or later, our final confrontation. When Michael saw me, he hurried out. His eyes were hollow, dark circles stark on his face. He came closer, voice shaking. "Mom, please let me talk to you, just once." I stayed quiet, opened the gate, and motioned him into the living room. The room glowed with late afternoon light, my seascapes on the walls. Michael sat on the sofa, hands clenched together, trembling. I sat across from him, a careful distance between us, my gaze steady. He stared at the floor. "I've lost everything, Mom. Sabrina left. The company I invested in went under. Friends disappeared. I have nothing left." I listened, a mix of pity, anger, and exhaustion rising in me. I asked, calm but clear, "So what are you here to ask me for today?" Michael looked up, eyes red. "Not money. I know you won't give it anymore. I want your forgiveness. I can't sleep, Mom. Your voice from that night keeps echoing in my head. I feel awful." I studied his face for a few seconds, lines of fatigue, eyes that once shone with pride now dulled. I said slowly, "Michael, forgiveness doesn't mean everything goes back to the way it was. Forgiveness is for my peace, not so you can lean on me and depend on me again." He broke down crying, the heavy, sad sound of a grown man. He dropped to his knees and took my hand. "Mom, I'm sorry. I don't know why I was so blind. I'll change. I'll start over, if you'll give me a chance to stand by you." I pulled my hand back, gentle but firm. I shook my head. "Michael, you're my son. That will never change. But the bond of money, of expectations, of unconditional sacrifice that's broken. I'm not your life raft anymore. If you want to start over, you have to stand up on your own." His eyes drifted, like a man lost in a dark night without a path. I stood and walked to the window, looking out at the distant sea. The horizon burned red, the whitecaps rolled in. I turned back, voice resolute. "You know, I found myself again. Painting, the ocean, and new friends showed me I can live fully without anyone's approval or fake gratitude. You need to learn that for yourself." Michael stood, eyes wet, nodding weakly. He took a few steps toward the door, then stopped. "So, is this the last time I can see you?" I stepped closer, set my hand on his shoulder, light but steady. "No, I'm still your mother. But from now on, I open this door only when you come as a man who takes responsibility, not as a child who makes demands. The day you do that, you'll find I'm still here." He bit his lip, said nothing more, and left quietly. The door clicked shut, leaving me in the still room, honeyed sunlight spilling across the wall. I sat down and poured myself a cup of tea. My heart didn't feel completely light, but something was unmistakable. An invisible cord had been cut. I was no longer bound by the guilt of a mother's duty that chained me for years. Michael would answer for what he had done. Outside the window, the scarlet sea faded into deep purple. I suddenly remembered the painting I finished yesterday, a woman standing tall against rough waves, unbroken. I smiled. That woman is me, and today I finally lived up to her. I lifted the teacup, letting the scent of jasmine drift through the air, and told myself, I've faced it, I've cut it off, and I'm free. Spring came late that year, and maybe that's why it was so stunning. Along the road to the beach, rows of cherry trees burst open in the breeze, pale pink petals falling softly, dusting shoulders and footsteps. I strolled under the branches, brushing each petal with my fingertips, feeling my heart warm, as if the whole universe were whispering, "It's time to begin again." The seaside house looked completely different now. Beige walls were dotted with my own paintings, from sunset seas to lavender fields I imagined. Each piece was a shard of my soul, a marker on the path where I learned to love myself. I once thought hair, a dress, or a set of jewelry measured my worth. Now I understand. True worth is in daring to rise from the ashes and bloom at an age no one expects. In the mornings, I brew a pot of jasmine tea and open the window so the salty air rolls in. I sit at the easel and lay down brighter colors than before. No longer only heavy grays, my canvases glow with yellow, pink, and sea green. It's like I'm painting myself in a late bloom season, flowers not meant for 20-somethings, but for a seasoned heart that still stirs and still dreams. Samuel, my classmate from painting, still drops by. Some days he brings a bunch of blazing red tulips, sets them on the table, and says, half joking, half earnest, "Late blooming flowers are still flowers, Beatrice." And they often hold their color longer. I smile, neither denying nor confirming, just letting joy slip into each moment. We sit on the porch, watch the ocean, sip coffee. He talks about structures he once designed. I talk about the years I juggled ledgers and sleepless nights. Once, he looked at me for a long time and said, "You know, I've never seen anyone as brave as you. Most people stay silent and endure. You chose to walk away." His words quieted something deep inside me. I didn't answer right. Away, just turned to the sea, where whitecaps kept rolling in like steady heartbeats. One afternoon, our class held a small-town exhibit. I brought a few of my pieces, both nervous and self-conscious. But when I saw them hanging beside others, I realized they held their own. A visitor lingered before Woman in the Sea and asked, "Who painted this? I'd like to buy it." I shook my head with a gentle smile. "I'm sorry, this one isn't for sale. It's a personal reminder." He nodded, understanding. The story made its way around class. Marianne, our teacher, hugged me and whispered, "Beatrice, you've found your season to bloom." That night, back home, I opened the windows to the ocean breeze. Moonlight laid a silver band across the water, mirroring the starry sky. I stood there a long time, feeling a peace I'd never tasted before. No more resentment, no more sting of betrayal, just a steady faith that life, even late, can still blossom. My phone buzzed on the table, a message from Michael. The same long paragraphs, the same pleading tone, but this time my hand didn't shake to delete them. I left them alone, calm. I'd said everything in our final face-to-face. I didn't owe more explanations, and those bonds no longer held me. I set down my tea, picked up my brush, and painted a white flower opening in the night against a deep violet sky. A late bloom, but whole, and as I laid the final strokes, I knew I was painting my own heart, a heart scarred by hurt, yet patient enough to wait for its full bloom. I whispered, as if to myself, "My season has come late, but beautiful." I never imagined that at my age I could live an entirely different life. A life not revolving around checks, strained family dinners, or being crushed by responsibility. Now, every morning I wake to watch the dawn pink the sea, to lift my brush, and add another patch of color to my painting. I still remember the day I dared to speak the truth at the wedding. It was the turning point of my life. For years I let silence chain me, let fear hold me down. But one brave moment set me free. Since then I've understood, Truth can hurt and cost you, but it's the only road to freedom. Michael. He still texts sometimes, occasionally calls. I don't avoid him, but I don't chase him either. I answer briefly, calmly. I show him that a mother's love remains, but reliance and exploitation do not. My son must learn to be a man, take responsibility, and build his own life. That's the only gift I can leave him, and it's worth more than $22 million. As for Sabrina, she vanished from town after the wrecked wedding. I heard she moved to another state, living quietly. I'm neither angry nor pleased. I understand the harshest punishment didn't come from me, it came from the truth in daylight. Once the mask falls, no one believes the pretty words. That's the heaviest sentence. Some afternoons I sit on the porch and watch the whitecaps, thinking how far I've come. From a widow scraping to save every dollar for my child, to a mother betrayed by her son, to the woman who stood up and exposed it all. I lost plenty, but I found myself. And in the end, I'm grateful even for the losses. They cleared a path to my real life. I'm not young, but I have my late bloom. My first paintings now hang in a small seaside shop. Not to make money, but to prove that age can't cage a creative spirit. Samuel drops by sometimes with a book or a new tube of paint, and we sit talking under the sunset. I don't call it late love, just companionship, and that, for me, is enough. If there's anything I want to tell those listening, it's this. Never think it's too late to start over. Truth may make you tremble, but once you speak it, your steps feel lighter. Don't wait for someone to hand you your worth. You can find it in your own hands, in your hobbies, in the small things your heart points to. I know many of you may be living with the fears I carried. Fear of losing affection, of being abandoned, of a family breaking if you stop sacrificing. But remember, real love is never built on taking advantage. Sometimes cutting a toxic tie is the only way to save yourself. And now, as I close my story, I want to say thank you. Thank you for staying, for walking with me through the dark, through the tremors, the tears, and the final smiles. Your presence, dear audience, proves that the story of an ordinary woman like me can still touch another heart. If you've known betrayal, dismissal, or being used, I hope you find a spark here to stand up. And if your days are peaceful, cherish them. They are priceless. I'll end with a warm ask. Please share your thoughts in the comments. Every story and experience deserves to be heard. If this journey meant something to you, tap like so I know I'm not speaking into the void. And if you'd like to keep walking together, subscribe so we can meet again in other stories, ones about truth, courage, and the strength of our later years. From the bottom of my heart, thank you for giving me your precious time. We may not know each other in real life, but in this moment, our hearts touched. And to me, that is a kind of miracle. Don't open the door, teach her how to save water. My daughter-in-law spat those cruel words as she turned the lock, trapping me in the bathroom for 2 days, in the very house I had bought with my own sweat and blood. Outside, my son calmly turned on the TV, leaned back in his chair, and laughed, as if his mother's humiliation were nothing more than cheap entertainment. I shivered inside a damp towel, no food, no chair, just the cold tile floor and the steady drip of water. While I curled up in the dark, they ate dinner and laughed together, unaware that in that exact moment I had made a decision. I would take everything back, and that would be the last peaceful dinner they'd ever have in this house. If you're still listening, tell me where you're watching from. Every comment you leave is another mark in this journey. And if this story has touched you, don't forget to hit like so it can reach even further. I'm Lila Whitmore, 71 years old, living in Virginia. I once thought old age would bring me peace, mornings making coffee in my own kitchen, listening to sparrows outside the window, and sometimes visiting church on Sundays. But peace only comes when you stop placing your trust in the wrong people. I never imagined I'd be locked in a bathroom by my own daughter-in-law like a criminal. I never imagined my only son, the child I held through freezing nights, whose forehead I kissed every time he had a fever, could sit there, casually turn up the TV, hear the click of a lock, and laugh. A small laugh, buried under TV commercials, that still stabs my heart every time I remember it. That bathroom was small, cold, and damp. I had only a towel around me, my hair still dripping. The chill from the tile seeped into my back and legs, making my knees ache. I leaned against the wall, staring at the dim light leaking under the door. No chair, no food, just the steady drip of the faucet and the clink of silverware outside the everyday rhythm of people who had forgotten their humanity. I didn't cry. I've cried plenty in my life when my husband died, when I lost my job, when I sold our old car to pay my son's hospital bill. But this time I stayed quiet. I knew tears don't wake anyone up. They only make you weaker. I rested my head against the wall and closed my eyes, letting memories pour in. Over 40 years ago, my husband Edward and I worked ourselves to the bone to buy this house. A small place in the suburbs of Richmond, 2 bedrooms, an apple tree in the backyard, and a white fence Edward painted himself. When he died of heart disease, I swore I'd keep this house at any cost, because it was the last piece of us left. I never imagined it would become my prison. I remember the day Cole brought Alyssa over. She was young, pretty, and smart, the kind of woman any man would want beside him. I was happy my son had found someone good. I welcomed her with an apple pie Edward used to love, and Alyssa beamed and hugged me. I didn't know then it would be the last time she was sincere. In the first months after they married, they lived with me because they couldn't afford a place yet. I didn't mind. I said, "This house is yours. Think of it as a start." I didn't mention the deed was still in my name, not from suspicion, but because I didn't think I needed to guard myself from family. I was the mother, and that was my son. Looking back now, that thinking was both naive and foolish. Things changed gradually. At first, Alyssa made small comments. "Mom, you leave the lights on too much." Or, "This dish smells too strong." I nodded, smiled, and figured she liked things tidy. But then her words got sharper. "She still thinks this is her house." I heard it as I passed the kitchen. Cole stayed silent. He neither defended his mother nor pushed back on his wife, just silence. And silence can be crueler than words. I lived in the same house but felt more and more like an uninvited guest. I tried to keep the peace, cooking and doing laundry for myself, avoiding their dinner hour. When they went to work, I weeded the backyard and trimmed the roses. Once, I repainted the fence Edward left behind. Cole stepped out, looked at me and said coldly, "Mom, you're too loud. I'm trying to rest." I turned back, smiled softly, and apologized. But something cracked inside me. That night I couldn't sleep. I looked around my small room, the wedding photo of me and Edward, the wooden box with the house papers, an old safe, only I knew the combination to. I brushed my hand over the deed and thought, I'm still the owner of this house. Then I gave a bitter little smile. Owner? An owner who has to whisper in the dark just to remember she still has any rights? 2 days later, everything blew up over a hot shower. I'd been fixing the fence all afternoon. It was cold. The air smelled of damp earth and rotting leaves. When I finished, my back ached and my hands trembled. I went to shower just to let warm water soothe my old shoulders. 10 minutes, only 10 minutes. The first pounding on the door startled me. "How long are you going to be?" Alyssa's voice snapped, sharp and hard. I answered, "Just a moment, I'm almost done." Silence. A few seconds later, the lock clicked. I spun around, grabbed the handle, and pulled. It didn't budge. I pounded on the door and called Cole's name. No answer. The TV got louder. I heard silverware clinking. Laughter. I stood still. My heart raced, but my mind suddenly felt strangely calm. I wrapped the towel around me and sat on the cold tile, watching the water spread in irregular streaks. I could hear my own breathing slow and steady, like I was counting the minutes. I tried calling out once more. No response. only the sitcom laughs from the living room. When the imaginary clock in my head finished its first full circle, I knew more than an hour had passed. I leaned back and stared at the ceiling. I didn't understand what I was being punished for using water or simply existing. That first night, I curled up in the dark, listening to the pipes knock like a heartbeat. The old smell of tile, dampness, and leftover soap mixed together. I drank from the faucet, the metallic taste cold and bitter. I bit my lip so I wouldn't cry. On the second day, my head swam, my lips cracked, my hands went numb. I heard Alyssa walk by. Her voice drifted back. She must have learned her lesson. Cole said nothing. Not one objection. Not one question about whether I was even alive. But in the hunger and the humiliation, I realized I wasn't afraid anymore. I've lived through loss, through the loneliness of widowhood, through freezing nights without enough heat. Nothing could break me. No one could keep me locked up forever, especially not in my own house. And when the door opened on the morning of the third day, Alyssa looked at me blankly and said, "Next time, learn to save." Cole stood behind her, avoiding my eyes. I just nodded. No words. No tears. I walked past them, hair wet, bare feet, back to my room. I shut the door and took a deep breath. On the table was the safe key. Morning light fell across the desk and lit up the framed deed. I smiled, not with bitterness, but with someone who had just found her strength again. I whispered to myself, "You turned the lock, but I'm the one holding the key." And from that moment on, the quiet plan to leave and take everything back began to form. I still remember that February morning air, so cold it cut the skin, frost on the porch, and the phone ringing at 5 a.m. The doctor on the line, voice hoarse, said that Edward, my husband, didn't survive his second heart attack. I sat frozen at the kitchen table, a steaming cup of coffee in front of me that suddenly tasted like nothing. The house felt too big, too quiet. Down the hall, Cole, only 8 years old, slept soundly, unaware that from that day on our world had changed forever. I watched him breathe, his little cheeks rising and falling, and whispered a promise I've never broken. "I will not let you go hungry. I will not let you. I feel alone." That vow kept me standing through every year that followed. I packed away my tears, dried my face, and the next day went out to find work. In the mornings, I cleaned a small office downtown. Hands used to holding a soup ladle now pushed a mop. The smell of cleaning chemicals stuck to my hair and skin, impossible to wash off even after 2 showers. In the afternoons, I worked the register at a corner store, standing 10 hours, smiling at every customer even as my feet swelled. At night, I did mending under a dim yellow lamp, stitches blurring as my eyes burned. Every time I looked at our wedding photo on the wall, I told myself, it's okay, as long as Cole has enough food and books. There were winter days when snow slowed the buses, and I got home near midnight. My fingers numb, lips cracked, but the moment I heard my boy whisper, "Mom?" the house felt warm again. I lit the stove, reheated the soup, and split the meal, the only piece of meat always in Cole's bowl. Mine was just broth and a few slices of potato. I never felt deprived. Watching him eat well made me feel full. Years later, I can still smell the wood burning in the fireplace, hear the spoon scraping the pot, feel his small hand on mine as he said, "Mom, I'll take care of you someday." Promise. I believed him with all my heart. I gave up small things women enjoy: new clothes, lipstick, a salon visit to spare a few more dollars for my son. When Cole hit high school and wanted to play baseball, I picked up an overnight warehouse shift to buy him a glove and cleats. Every time I saw him suited up on the field, pride brought me to tears. I thought, if Edward were here, he'd be smiling just like I was. Every birthday, even when I barely had anything left, I baked him a little cake. Once, I scraped together leftover flour, mixed in some sugar, and used our old rusty oven. When I lit the candle, he blew it out and grinned. "Mom, this is the best cake in the world." I laughed and turned away so he wouldn't see my tears of happiness. I thought, as long as he grows up kind, every sacrifice is worth it. But life rarely plays fair. After Cole went to college, I thought I could rest a bit. Tuition cost more than I imagined. I didn't want him buried in debt. I picked up a morning cleaning job at the library and a temporary cashier shift at a small neighborhood supermarket. At night, I did extra mending and fixed neighbors' jeans. Some mornings I fell asleep at the kitchen table, a spoon's imprint on my cheek. But when I read his letters from school, telling me his GPA was high, I found the strength to keep going. I only wished that one day Cole would graduate, find a good job, start a family, and be able to take care of himself. At graduation, I sat in the stands, clutching his diploma in its wrinkled envelope. I cried tears of joy, because everything I'd worked for had taken shape. I thought maybe Edward was watching from somewhere, smiling. After the ceremony, Cole hugged me tight. I still remember that hug, heartbeat for heartbeat. "Mom, I'm here because of you." I thought those words would stay with me for life, but maybe that was the moment I made my mistake. I thought love and sacrifice naturally grow gratitude. I didn't know that when kindness has no boundaries, it teaches others to see it as obligation. In the years after Cole started working, I still didn't slow down. I kept waking at 5 a.m., making coffee and breakfast, waiting for his footsteps on the stairs. I still asked, "What do you want to eat?" like he was still 8. I didn't realize I'd raised in him the habit of being served, not the habit of sharing. I still remember the dinner when Cole turned 30. He brought Alyssa over to meet me. I cooked all day, pot roast, salad, pie, the dishes Edward used to love. When they arrived, I was waiting at the door, hands still dusty with flour. Alyssa hugged me and said sweetly, "Mom, Lila, Cole says you're the best cook in the city." I laughed, warmth flooding my chest. I thought, how wonderful my son has found someone who appreciates him. But during that meal, when I put a piece of meat on Cole's plate, Alyssa gently set her hand on mine and said, in a voice soft as a feather, "Mom, let me take care of him, okay?" I nodded, thinking nothing of it. But that night, for the first time, I noticed my own plate was untouched when they had already finished eating. I'd been busy watching my son, busy talking, and forgot to eat. No one noticed. And strangely, that very dinner was when I first felt I was missing my share. In the years after Cole married Alyssa, I kept thinking she just needed time to adjust. I believed love would help people understand one another. I thought if I gave a little more, the family would be peaceful. I never imagined that very willingness to yield would teach them how to keep pushing the line. Once, a neighbor said to me, "Mrs. Lila, you're too gentle." When kids get used to being pampered, they start treating it like a right. I only smiled. He's my only son. How could I be angry with him? Looking back now, I see I was wrong from that very moment. I thought I could use affection to fight selfishness, use tolerance to dissolve ingratitude. But kindness without boundaries is nothing more than an invitation for others to step over yours. All those years of working myself to exhaustion, I never imagined the money I sweated for, the pieces of cake I split to save for my son, would one day become someone else's fancy dinner, one where I no longer had a seat. I spent my life making sure Cole lacked nothing: food, clothes, love. What I failed to teach him was how to value those things. And maybe that was the first mistake that led to all the tragedies that followed. Cole's wedding took place on an early summer afternoon in the little backyard where Edward had built a wooden swing for our boy when he was 5. I spent a whole month preparing, repainting the fence, trimming the apple tree, washing every curtain. I wanted everything perfect for my son's big day. Cole wore a navy suit and looked mature and confident. Alyssa, in a simple, elegant white dress, made my heart pinch a little. She was so beautiful, radiant, as if every light pointed toward her. When the music started, I stood in the very last row, holding a small bouquet. I watched my son walk down the aisle, eyes shining, and told myself, "You've truly grown up." In that moment, I believed every hardship, every year of toil had meaning. After the ceremony at the small backyard reception, Cole took my hand and said, "Mom, I wouldn't be here without you." I smiled, and for a moment all the tired years melted away. I looked around the house where his childhood laughter once echoed and knew I was about to hand it to the next generation. When the guests had left, I placed an envelope on the dining table inside were the house papers. I said, "This house is yours. I want you two to have a solid start." Alyssa froze, eyes brimming, and Cole hugged me tight. But there was one thing I didn't say. The deed was still in my name. Not because I didn't trust my son, but because Edward's old attorney had once advised me to keep ownership until necessary. He called it a legal spare key for when life doesn't go as planned. At the time, I never thought I'd need it. I moved into the small room at the end of the hallway, where light only slipped in through a tiny window facing the backyard. I brought a few of my things: Edward's armchair, the wooden box of documents, and our wedding photo. I wanted the young couple to have their own space. I cooked for myself, did my own laundry, and tried to keep myself small and quiet, like a guest renting a room in my own house. At first, Alyssa was very sweet. She called me Mom, asked what I liked to eat, even made me a cup of afternoon tea now and then. I thought I was lucky to have such a considerate daughter-in-law. I helped them decorate the living room, reorganize the kitchen, tidy the yard, and felt happy to still be useful. Then the gentle words shifted into constant little reminders. "Mom, could you turn the TV off earlier? It's a bit loud." "Mom, this bone broth smells great, but the scent spreads all over the house." Or, "Mom, your slippers are a little off. I'm afraid someone might trip." At first, I didn't mind. I figured she just wanted the place neat. But when those comments repeated day after day, I began to feel like a clumsy guest in the very place I had built. Cole, as usual, chose silence. Whenever I looked a little down or drifted away, he only said, "Mom, don't worry about it. Alyssa's just particular." "I just want a peaceful house." I heard "let it go" to keep the peace so often it became routine. I tried to be patient. I got up earlier, turned off the TV sooner, cooked separate dishes with less smell. I always believed silence kept the peace. I'd been through a long marriage. I knew when to avoid conflict. But silence, stretched too long, becomes an invisible wall, and once it's up, it's hard to tear down. One evening, I heard Alyssa on the phone in the living room, her voice sweet but tinged with fatigue. "You know, living with your mother-in-law isn't easy. She's nice, but it still feels like this is her house." I stood still behind the door, dish towel in hand. I wasn't angry. I just felt cold. Yes, this house was mine. But her words made me realize in her eyes I was someone who'd stayed too long and refused to leave. I pulled back. I avoided the living room, cooked when they were at work, cleaned when they slept. At dinner, I'd leave my portion on the table and eat later in my room. I didn't want anyone to have to put up with my presence anymore. Sometimes Cole came into my room, sat down, and asked a few polite questions. "Mom, you doing okay? Do you need anything?" I always answered, "I'm fine." I didn't want to bother him. But the painful truth was that the warm bond between us had thinned into pure obligation. I still remember a late night while I was folding laundry. Alyssa walked in, her usual small smile gone. "Mom, I think we should do our own laundry. Thank you, but we want to get used to doing it ourselves." I nodded and swallowed a sigh. After she left, I stared at the half-folded clothes. For the first time in years, I felt truly unnecessary. Even so, I kept my Sunday morning tea habit. I made 3 cups and set them on the kitchen table. 2 always stayed full. One morning, Alyssa looked at me, smiled, and said, light but sharp, "Mom, you don't have to worry about that. Cole and I will get coffee out. You should rest." The door closed, leaving 2 cups of tea to go cold. I sat down and watched the steam disappear, my heart feeling hollow. A neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, once stopped by and saw me sweeping the porch. She said, "Mrs. Lila, the house is lively now, but why do I rarely see them talk with you?" I forced a smile. "Young people are busy, Mrs. Peterson. They have their own lives." It sounded calm, but only I knew how tight my throat felt saying it. At night, I sat in Edward's old armchair, watching the living room light leak through the door crack. I could hear them talking, laughing, sometimes discussing remodel plans. "Once," Alyssa said, "if we knock out the wall by the room at the end of the hall, the bedroom will be bigger. The room at the end of the hall, my room." I heard Cole answer softly, "It's okay. Mom will want her own place eventually." My chest tightened, but I still didn't cry. I just clasped my hands together like I was holding on to the last of my dignity. I used to think love was the strongest bond, but love can rot in silence like an old boat that doesn't split open, just slowly takes on water until it sinks. I chose silence because I was afraid of losing my son. I was afraid that speaking up would crack everything beyond repair. I didn't realize that one person's silence is often mistaken by others as consent. And that supposed consent made them believe they could say and do anything, even lock me in a bathroom for 2 full days, inside a house where every brick bears my fingerprints. On the first autumn evening after their wedding, I flipped on the hallway light like always. With age, my eyesight has faded, so when I go to the kitchen at night, I leave a small lamp on a soft yellow glow that keeps me from tripping. But that night, the light snapped off the moment I stepped out. From the living room, Alyssa's voice came steady and cold. "Electricity isn't free, Mom." I froze. The words weren't loud, but they fell into my ears like steady drops on stone, not strong enough to break it, but sharp enough to sting. I smiled faintly, telling myself she was just reminding me. I didn't respond, just slipped back to my bed, an emptiness I couldn't explain spreading inside me. The next morning, I made tea early. The water was warm, not hot like usual. I tried to turn up the heater but realized the temperature had been lowered. When I asked, Alyssa just smiled. "I adjusted it to save energy, Mom. Good for the environment." I nodded and didn't argue. I like saving too. But in her voice I heard something else, as if I'd been lectured, not included. Little things like that kept popping up, like pebbles tossed into a still pond. I folded their bath towels. Alyssa opened them, refolded, and said gently, "Mom, these should be folded in thirds, not halves." I loaded the washer. She told me I used the wrong amount of water. I started the dishwasher. She frowned. "Mom, plates should go in straight rows, not at an angle. The water won't reach evenly." Each time, I apologized, smiled, and said, "I'll remember." I thought I was keeping the peace, but the way Alyssa nodded, pursed her lips, and turned away made me feel like a clumsy housemaid, not the homeowner. That night, as I passed the hall, I overheard them in the kitchen. "She still thinks this is her house." Alyssa's voice wasn't overtly mean, just tired. But that "still thinks" sliced deep. I leaned against the wall and swallowed hard. I wanted to walk in, smile, and say, "Yes, it is my house." But I couldn't. I just stood there, listening to pans clatter and sauce simmer, then went back to my room and closed the door softly. The next morning, I went to the yard. I cut the grass, wiped the patio table, and replaced the faucet gasket, little jobs Edward used to do. Sweat stuck to my shirt and my hands ached, but in the work I felt useful. When Alyssa came home, I greeted her with a smile and said, "I changed the leaky kitchen gasket so the water runs stronger now." She gave a short reply. "Oh, Mom, you don't need to do that." We were going to call a repairman. Then she headed straight upstairs. I stood there looking at my hands' thin, calloused fingers, nails stained with rubber dust. I didn't understand why my kindness now seemed to annoy people. I realized Alyssa had started setting little rules. First it was lights, then water, then food. She said, "Mom, don't buy whole milk anymore. Cole and I only drink almond. Please get your own kind so there's no mix-ups." I nodded. I only need a little milk for my morning tea, but that "so there's no mix-ups" felt like a label slapped on me. Another day, she taped a sheet to the fridge. House rules: keep it clean, save resources, respect personal space. At the bottom were both their signatures. I stared at that paper for a long time. It didn't mention me, but it felt like it was speaking directly to me. Cole was the same, silent. His silence had its own tone. Not indifference, but compromise. Every time I tried to bring something up, he just smiled. "Mom, Alyssa worries about small stuff. Don't take it to heart." I couldn't tell whether to be sad that my son wouldn't defend me or sad that he thought I was too weak to defend myself. I started storing everything in my memory, each look, each tone, each sigh. Not to hold a grudge, but to stop lying to myself that things would get better. I've spent years waiting for things to get better, and I know that if you don't stop the bad, it only gets worse. One evening, Alyssa invited friends over for dinner. I wasn't told ahead of time. When I came downstairs, she'd already set the table, scented candles burning, soft jazz playing. I smiled and said, "Oh, a party? Let me help set up." She shook her head, still smiling. "No need, Mom. Please relax, we've got it." I turned away, but as I reached the stairs, I heard one of her friends whisper, "You live with your mother-in-law?" Alyssa laughed, a hint of mockery. "Yeah, but she's so gentle you almost don't notice she's around." The group burst out laughing. I froze on the step, hand gripping the banister. "Almost don't notice she's around" sounded like a compliment, but it smelled of erasure. After the party, they laughed and talked late into the night. I couldn't sleep. I heard glasses clinking, high heels tapping on the wood floor. I remembered parties years ago, when Cole's friends came over and I baked cookies, poured lemonade, laughter ringing through the house. Now, all I heard was my own breathing in a small room, the hallway light still off. The next morning I went to the kitchen and found the table full of dirty glasses. I washed them all and wiped everything spotless, leaving no trace. When Alyssa woke up, she looked surprised. "Mom, you didn't have to do that. I was going to clean up." I just smiled. "It's okay, I'm used to getting up early." But from then on, I started watching everything I did. If I did the laundry, she'd redo it. If I cooked something, she'd say they already ate out. I was turning into a shadow in my own house. Another night, I heard Cole and Alyssa talking in the living room. The door wasn't fully closed, and I clearly heard Alyssa say, "I just feel uncomfortable with her staying here forever. This is our home, but everything still feels arranged by her. Even the way it smells is hers." Cole answered softly, "I know, but I don't want to hurt my mom." Alyssa let out a light laugh. "Hurt her? She probably doesn't even notice." I went back to my room and shut the door. I sat on the bed and stared at the ceiling. I didn't cry, but something inside me, a small, quiet part, snapped. The next day, I stopped turning on the hallway light. I walked in the dark, one hand tracing the wall. I didn't want to hear "electricity isn't free" again. I didn't run the water heater too long, didn't fold towels the way I always had, didn't use scented fabric softener. I lived like a renter, tiptoeing in the very house I paid for. But from that point on, something else began to form in me, a clear, alert record. I remembered not to resent, but to stop deceiving myself with Alyssa's just tired or Cole's stuck in the middle. No, I understood. People who've been loved too much often never learn to value it. I looked back at what I'd done, gifting the house, cooking, quietly helping, and realized my overkindness might have taught them they had the right to look down on me. I didn't react, argue, or raise my voice. I simply noted every sign of contempt, like someone collecting evidence even they don't yet realize they're producing. Because deep down, I knew every slight, no matter how small, is a warning before the storm. And I, Lila Whitmore, had started to hear the wind rise. That afternoon, the wind swept through the backyard, carrying the smell of dry leaves and damp soil. I stood by the wooden fence, rubber mallet in hand, trying to replace a few warped boards after last week's rain. Fall in Virginia always has a sneaky chill, not enough to bite but enough to swell the joints so that every strike of the nail sent a sting up my wrist. I worked slowly, carefully, the way Edward used to. He always told me, "Don't let things sit broken too long. Lila, fix them while you can." When I set the last board, the sun had slipped behind the trees, leaving a wash of pale orange across the ground. The wind turned sharper, my back burned, my calloused hands stiffened. I took a deep breath, inhaled the scent of fresh-cut wood, and went inside. My whole body ached, sweat and dust clinging to my shirt. All I could think about was a hot shower to loosen my tight shoulders. The bathroom was small, steam fogging the mirror quickly. I turned on the warm water and stood still, letting it run down my back slowly, like it was washing away months of silence layered over the house. Not even 10 minutes later, I heard footsteps growing heavy in the hall. The first pounding hit like thunder. "How much longer, Mom?" Alyssa's voice cold and sharp as steel. I startled and answered through the steam. "Just a moment, I'm almost done." No reply, only a sigh. Then a few seconds later, it came the dry, decisive sound of the lock turning from the outside. I spun around, wet hands shaking on the knob. I pulled hard. Nothing. I called out, "Alyssa, what's going on?" "Open the door." Silence. Only the TV from the living room, silverware clinking, laughter. I called louder, this time to Cole. "Cole, do you hear me? Open the door for Mom." No answer. Just a short laugh, then a sitcom theme swelling. I pounded the door over and over, only to get the dull clank of metal in return. The door felt colder than the water on my skin. I stood still, chest heaving, stunned and disbelieving. For a moment I wanted to think it was a mistake, a prank, or some lesson they thought I needed. But minute after long minute, I knew this wasn't a joke. I wrapped the towel around me and sat on the floor. The tile was freezing, damp soaking through the towel and into my bones. I listened to them chat outside Alyssa's even tone, Cole's responses like nothing was happening. Every laugh sliced through the trust I'd spent a lifetime protecting. I shouted a few more times. Then I went quiet. Silence wasn't a choice anymore, it was survival. I leaned my head back against the wall, closed my eyes, and tried to breathe slowly. I thought of Edward, of my years as a single mother, of the promise I made long ago. I vowed my son would never go without, never imagined I would be starved and locked up by that very child. Now I understood the cruelest betrayal isn't shouting, it's absolute indifference. That first night, all I had was the cold trickle from the faucet. I drank a few sips, the metallic tang sharp and bitter. Hunger twisted my stomach, but I didn't knock again. I sat still, listening to the fridge door close, footsteps passing by. They went to bed. The whole house fell silent. I curled up on the tile, my back throbbing, my heartbeat fading. I couldn't sleep. Every creak in the pipes reminded me I was being held. Once I heard Cole walk by, keys jingling, then stop outside the bathroom. I thought he would open the door. He didn't. A few seconds of quiet, then his footsteps drifted away. By morning, a sliver of light slipped under the door. My head felt heavy, lips dry, hands shaking. I forced myself up and looked in the mirror, hair a mess, hollow cheeks, red eyes. I gave a thin smile, a mother locked in her own house. Who would believe it? I called out again. No response. I heard dishes, smelled coffee drifting in through the crack, then the front door slammed. They left for work. I was alone with the silence. The bathroom became my whole world, small, cramped, and cold. I had no clock, so I counted time by my heartbeat and the number of cars passing outside. By noon, I slid to the floor, dizzy with hunger. I pressed my forehead to the cold wall and closed my eyes, trying to steady myself. Alyssa's words from the day before looped in my head. She still thinks this is her house. Yes, I did think so. Maybe that's exactly why I was being kept like an intruder. By evening, I heard them return, the door opening, footsteps, then familiar laughter. I wanted to scream, to pound the door until my hands bled, but I didn't. I stayed still. There's no point explaining to people who don't want to hear. On the second night, my stomach growled in waves. I drank from the tap to dull the hunger. Wind hissed through the tiny window above, cold air raising goosebumps on my skin. I trembled, but didn't cry. I thought how strange it is that people become clearest when pushed to their limits. I remembered the factory days when I was young, hands raw and still smiling, thinking as long as my boy was okay, it was enough. I'd lived my whole life for other people and never thought about defending myself. But here, in this mildewed bathroom, I understood. If I didn't stand up and reclaim my dignity, all those years would mean nothing. When I closed my eyes, I saw Edward in my mind. He stood by the fence, smiling. "Lila, don't let anyone treat you like you don't matter." I opened my eyes. My palms were cold, but my heart felt strangely warm. I wasn't afraid anymore. I didn't beg. I didn't pound the door. I let time pass, let them think I'd surrendered. In the silence, I made a plan. If they used a lock to teach me to save, I would use the law to teach them limits. I started observing the time the door opened each morning, the jingle of keys on the table, when they left, when their steps returned at night. I stored every detail in my head. I would need it later. On the morning of the third day, the lock clicked again, this time in reverse. The door cracked and light slipped in. Alyssa appeared, phone in hand, her voice casual like nothing had happened. "Next time, don't waste water, Mom." She turned away without waiting for an answer. Cole stood in the living room with his back to me. No look, no concern. I stepped out, water dripping from my hair, feet freezing on the floor. I walked past them like a ghost, back to my room, and shut the door. I sat on the edge of the bed, fingers touching the old safe key. The first feeling wasn't anger, it was clarity. A frightening kind of clarity, the kind that lets you see exactly where the limits of your tolerance end. I don't know how long I sat there. I only know that when the morning light slanted through the curtain, I had a clear decision. There would not be a second time. I wouldn't say anything. I wouldn't cry, wouldn't tell the neighbors, wouldn't beg Cole to realize his mistake. I used to believe in family ties, but from now on, I believe in justice. If they think they can lock me up in this house, they've forgotten the owner of this house is still me. On the third morning, the lock turned with a short, dry, decisive click. The door opened and light rushed in, making me blink. The early chill swept into the bathroom, mixed with the smell of old soap and mildew. Alyssa stood in the doorway, hair tied back, phone in hand, voice even and flat. "Next time, don't waste water, Mom." No guilty look. No apology, just a sentence that fell light as dust and heavy as lead. Cole stood behind her, leaning on the wall, eyes glued to the TV. As I walked past, he didn't look up or say a word. For a second, I saw his hand clench the remote, knuckles white, and then release like nothing happened. I didn't speak, didn't look, didn't let them see a drop of water on my face. I wrapped the towel tight, walked down the long hallway, each step on the cold floor, feeling like I was leaving a prison. I didn't look back. No one deserved to see my eyes then, not angry, not hurt, but utterly indifferent. In my room, I sat down. opened the small drawer. The safe key lay still in my palm, its dull metallic shine catching the morning light. That cold metal felt like it was breathing with me. I took a deep breath and felt my heartbeat slow and steady. I pulled a small sheet of paper from the desk and carefully wrote 5 lines, neat and firm. 1. Confirm ownership. 2. Call the lawyer. 3. Find a discreet buyer. 4. Create my own account. 5. Disappear. I folded the paper in half and tucked it into Edward's old notebook between 2 yellowed pages. It wasn't a revenge list. It was a survival plan. That morning, I made tea like usual. Alyssa and Cole ate in silence, spoons tapping porcelain with a sound like metal scraping glaze. I set the kettle on the table and asked, "Cole, it's cold today. Remember your coat?" He just nodded, eyes never leaving his phone. Alyssa sipped her coffee, glanced at me, and looked away. "No, thank you." I still smiled, calm as if nothing had happened. The chill in that house no longer came from the weather, but from the silence of 3 people living together with no connection left. By day, I did everything the same, watering plants, wiping tables, washing dishes. I let the water run just enough, turned lights on and off exactly on schedule, earlier than usual. I followed their rules perfectly, because I understood, if you want to leave quietly, you first play the role of the compliant one. At noon, when they left for work, I shut my door and drew the curtains. I opened the safe, the lock clicked. Soft but loud in the stillness. Inside were the things I'd kept for years: the house title, Edward's life insurance policy, savings book, and several bank statements I'd hidden well, all in my name, clearly signed, fully legal. I held the property certificate in my palm and stared at the bold letters, Lila Whitmore, my signature. At the bottom, strong and even dated nearly 20 years ago, a feeling both wry and peaceful rose in my chest. All these years they lived in my house, but it never truly belonged to them. I read every page, missing nothing. The deed, property tax papers, fire insurance, bank agreements, everything in order. I even found a copy of Edward's old insurance policy. I thought it was lost. In the margin, he had once written a small note by hand, "For Lila, who knows the value of effort more than anyone." I touched that line lightly. A small smile came to my lips, not happiness, but the smile of someone who's found her backbone again. By afternoon, I walked to the post office. On the way, leafless trees shook in the wind, and my shoes knocked against the pavement, slow but steady. I emailed Edward's old lawyer. He was still alive, still working at a small office near the courthouse. I didn't explain everything, just wrote briefly, "I want to reconfirm the property ownership registered in 2005. Please check it for me as soon as possible." That evening, I got home before they did and cooked a small pot of chicken soup, fragrant with celery and black pepper. When Alyssa walked in, she seemed surprised by the smell but said nothing. I set 3 bowls on the table and invited them. The silence stretched so long I could hear each tick of the wall clock. I ate slowly without looking at them. With every spoonful, I felt a sheet of ice forming in my chest, cold but firm. Night fell, they shut their door, and I opened the safe again. I took out my small notebook and added details to the plan. 1. Call the lawyer back after his response. 2. Contact the discreet broker, the one who sold Mrs. Peterson's old house. 3. Check the limits for international transfers. 4. Open a separate account under my maiden name, Lila Moore. I paused, staring at the 4 lines, pen still in hand. A tear fell onto the page, not from sadness, but because freedom had begun to sprout. In the days that followed, I kept living as if nothing had changed. I still smiled when I saw them, still asked Cole, "Work okay, son?" Still answered, "Sleep well," when Alyssa tossed out a quick goodnight. But inside, I was no longer the woman afraid to bother anyone, afraid to upset her son. I had become an observer, quiet and clear. On the fourth morning, I received a reply from the law office. The ownership verification was freshly stamped, clearly listing me as the sole owner of the house. I folded it and slipped it into my purse. In that moment, I felt a strange peace, not the thrill of victory, but the calm of someone who has taken back control of her life. That evening, when Alyssa opened the fridge and complained, "Why did you buy so much milk?" I simply answered, "I'm used to it. It'll be gone soon." She didn't realize there was another meaning in it. Soon wasn't just the milk, it was everything between us. Late at night, I tidied my room. I gathered a few essentials: the photo album, Edward's wedding ring, a small jewelry box, a few important papers. I packed everything into a small suitcase, then sat by the bed and listened to the wind at the window frame. In the quiet, I saw something simple. The moment they locked me in the bathroom, they didn't just imprison my body, they unlocked someone else in me. Someone who knows blind patience isn't a virtue, it's self-bondage. Someone who understands some battles don't need shouting, only a signature at the right time. I sat still, looking at my reflection in the mirror. The warm yellow light fell across my face, lines deep around my eyes. But this time I didn't look tired. I saw a woman who had finally woken up after a decades-long sleep. I smiled and placed a hand over my chest, feeling a slow, strong heartbeat. In my mind, the 5 steps glowed as clearly as the old hallway light I once turned off to keep others comfortable. Now I switched it back on, just to light the way for myself. 2 days later, I put on a light gray wool coat, wrapped a dark scarf, and stepped out at 8 a.m. January wind in Virginia sliced through, stinging my cheeks like a reminder. Stay sharp, don't tremble. I called a cab to the law office where Edward had worked with Mr. Harold Benson, the man who helped us write our will, buy the house, and keep our documents straight for 20 years. When I walked in, Mr. Benson looked up, surprised. The same kind face, hair nearly all white, thin glasses slipping down his nose. "My goodness, Lila Whitmore, it's been a long time," he said, voice rough but warm. "Edward would be smiling somewhere, knowing you've kept everything this orderly." I gave a small smile and set the file on his desk. "I need you to reconfirm the house ownership, and I may need help selling it quietly." His eyes shifted, not in surprise but in understanding. He opened the file and read every page carefully. After a few minutes, he nodded. "Everything's clean and fully in your name. I'll arrange a private transaction, no sign, no public listing. Just a few weeks to complete." I exhaled lightly, like a knot had been loosened from my throat. He looked up with a half smile. "I don't need to know what happened, but if you're going to leave, leave with your head high, and make sure no one knows the closing date." I nodded. "That's exactly what I'll do." Leaving the law office, I stopped by the bank. No one paid attention to an older woman with a small purse and a steady gaze. I opened a brand new account entirely in my name, with only my signature authorized. The clerk asked, "Would you like to link it to your existing accounts?" I smiled and shook my head. "No, thank you. This one is for personal matters." I also requested a small trust account overseas and moved a portion of Edward's old insurance into it, enough to live comfortably for years, but not so much that anyone at home would be suspicious if they saw a statement. From that day on, every morning I withdrew a small amount of cash, no more than $500, just enough to look like ordinary spending. I tucked it into envelopes and hid them at the bottom of my suitcase, cushioned by old sweaters. I once read that when you want to disappear without notice, the key isn't where you go, it's leaving quietly, in steps so reasonable no one notices. I came home as if I'd just run errands. Alyssa was watering plants on the porch. She saw me and said, "Mom, out early today?" I answered lightly, Went to the bank to pay the car insurance. She just said, "Uh-huh," and turned away. No more questions. Everything went on like that, quiet, steady like a clock. I kept my old routine. Coffee at 7 a.m., watering orchids at 10 a.m., cooking my own meals in the afternoon. I showed them nothing unusual. If anything had changed, it was only the calm in my voice. Every evening, Alyssa chatted on the phone in the kitchen. She often mentioned remodel plans. One day, while I was stacking dishes, she said to someone offhand, "Probably this summer we'll gut the kitchen. That wall is ancient." I froze. Gut the kitchen? The kitchen where I spent thousands of mornings cooking for my husband and son, where a tiny burn mark still sits on the counter from when Cole baked at 10 years old. I looked at Alyssa, nodded, and said softly, "That's fine, as long as you like it." She didn't know that every time she said gut, I heard the crack of the past breaking. That night in my room, I opened the safe and checked the documents again. I added one more line to the plan. Day 18, sign the sale contract. Day 21, transfer complete. Day 24, leave. 3 weeks. Only 3 weeks left. I closed the safe, locked it, then sat on the bed, hands wrapped around a cup of cold tea. I looked around the small room. Each item I'd bought with my own hands, the purple floral curtains Edward chose, our wedding photo, the vase of dried flowers by the window. I knew that soon I would leave it all. Instead of sadness, I felt light. The next day, when Cole went to work, Alyssa sat in the living room with her laptop open, searching for kitchen inspo. She called me over in a syrupy voice. "Mom, do you think these tiles match?" I love that Scandinavian white and gray look, so classy. I looked at the screen, a gleaming, unfamiliar kitchen with no warmth at all. I nodded. "It's pretty, Alyssa. It suits you too." Inside, a different smile bloomed, the smile of someone watching others paint on a board that's about to be wiped clean. That evening, Cole talked about a Hawaii vacation. He was excited, said he'd take 2 weeks off and bring Alyssa along, "So you can rest at home." I answered, "Great idea, I'll watch the house." They both smiled and thanked me. They had no idea the day they boarded that plane would be the day I left their lives. I began moving in order, like a chess game. Every move calculated, no rushing, no missteps. I tidied my room, tossed unneeded papers, destroyed old bills that could reveal information. I took a few items to the charity shop, part habit, part making space in my luggage. On the 8th morning, I got a confirmation email. The house sale contract has been prepared. All procedures are legal. Waiting only for the signing date. I read it 3 times, then deleted the message, leaving no trace. That night, I sat in the dark living room with only one small lamp on. Alyssa and Cole were arguing about savings, but their voices faded. It all sounded like echoes from another world, the one I was about to leave. I sipped cold tea, watching the lamplight reflected on the wooden table, oddly indifferent. Every feeling, hurt, anger, bitterness, seemed to have frozen into a clear sheet of ice. On the outside, I looked like any other elderly mother. On the inside, I was counting moves in a silent game. I knew their habits precisely: when they left, when they returned, when the TV went on, when they slept. I learned to walk so lightly the floor wouldn't creak, to speak just enough so they'd think I was still obedient. A woman once locked in a bathroom for 2 days now held the controls again, and no one noticed. I wasn't the victim anymore. I was the one finishing the game with precise moves. When Alyssa showed off the new kitchen render and Cole went on about Hawaii, I just nodded. Inside, I smiled a discreet, cool smile because I knew they were investing effort into a house that, in only 3 weeks, wouldn't be theirs. 3 weeks. 3 weeks for me to play the kind mother, the calm grandmother. 3 weeks to prepare for closing that door one last time, this time from the outside. One late February morning, fog veiled the road as I rode a taxi to the law office. Cold air slid through the window crack, carrying the usual metallic scent of traffic. I looked out the glass as bare trees slipped by, my heart strangely calm. After so many years, I was finally doing what I should have done long ago, deciding my own life. Attorney Harold greeted me with a small smile and a knowing nod. "That young couple is very discreet," he said. "Paying cash, no loan. I've checked their background, decent and trustworthy." I simply said, "I trust you." On the desk, the file was neatly stacked, not a single extra page. Everything had been reviewed: ownership verification, transfer contract, property handover documents. He handed me a pen with glossy black ink and said slowly, "All I need is your signature here, Lila. After today, this house will no longer be connected to you." I looked at the printed name, Lila Whitmore, bold and straight. My hand trembled slightly, not from doubt, but because years of bottled emotions were about to be released. I set the pen down and signed clean and decisive. As the pen lifted from the paper, I felt like I'd just closed a book I'd been reading too long, so long I'd forgotten I could put it down. "The transaction will be complete within 72 hours, Harold said, carefully gathering the documents. "The funds will go straight to your account. I'll hold the keys and hand them to the buyers the very morning you leave." I nodded. "Thank you, Harold. And please don't inform anyone." "Of course," he replied, quiet but firm. Disappearing deserves the same protection as privacy. When I stepped outside, the sun had broken through, light touched my silver hair, and everything felt feather-light. I paused on the sidewalk, watched people hurry by, then walked into the cafe across the street. A hot cappuccino arrived, foam thick and smooth. I took a sip, the sweet bitterness slid down my throat. For the first time in years, I felt a morning that truly belonged to me. By afternoon, I was home. Alyssa was on the phone. Cole was sprawled on the couch. I smiled and walked past like any other day. No one noticed a thing. In my room, I opened my laptop and searched for a faraway coastal town, Mariners Bay, Oregon. A small, quiet place with a green bay and rows of wooden houses. I read the description. A town of wind, where people come to start over. I chose an early morning flight one way, no return. I booked a small seaside room, a pale blue house with a white porch, less than 100 yards from the sand. The owner, a middle-aged woman, messaged back warmly, "Your room will be ready. Just bring the sunshine." I smiled. It had been a long time since anyone said something so kind to me. That night, while they watched TV, I slipped into my room and opened the wardrobe. The old suitcase brown leather, the one Edward bought when we were poor, lay at the bottom. I wiped off the dust, opened it, and folded each item slowly. A few simple outfits, a wool sweater, walking shoes, and the small wooden box holding Edward's wedding ring. I placed it on top, the final keepsake of a lifetime. I added an envelope of cash and a small document pouch with what I needed: passport, insurance paperwork, bank statements, everything fit snugly inside. I pulled the zipper, the small click sounding both familiar and new, like fate snapping shut. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked around the room. The room where I slept after my husband died, where I held my feverish boy through the night, where I believed love could conquer anything. Now it was just a temporary stop. I felt no regret, only lightness. I texted the woman at the corner grocery, Mrs. Peterson, who always set aside a small bottle of milk for me in the mornings. "Thank you for your kindness all these years. If I ever come back, I'll stop by." I didn't mention the date. I wanted this goodbye to have no farewell. That night, I lay listening to the wind slip through the window. Branches tapped the frame, the clock ticked, and from the next room the TV murmured on. I closed my eyes. No anger, no regret. Only a calm as still as water before dawn. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual. I made coffee and carefully left 2 cups for them on the table, an old habit. I watched light filter through the curtains, dust floating in the air, and knew everything was closing. I called the taxi I'd booked and confirmed the flight. The ticket was already in my coat pocket. I wrote a short note, folded it, and placed it in the drawer beside the family photo. Thank you for the years that were once warm. Don't look for me because I've found myself. I didn't sign my name. At noon, when Alyssa and Cole went out, I sat in the living room and looked around one last time. Sunlight fell on the walls where I once hung Cole's birthday photos, where Edward's laughter used to echo. I ran my hand across the wooden table, like saying goodbye to the past. I picked up the phone and called Harold. I've signed. The handover date stays the same, right? That's right, he said. I'll pass the keys to the buyers the very morning you leave. Good, I said evenly. Then it's done. I hung up and looked around again. Sparrows chirped on the porch. I smiled, a rare, genuine smile not meant for anyone to see. That night I put everything in order. I turned off all the lights, leaving only the hallway nightlight, the very light I'd once been scolded for as wasting electricity. It felt warm now, like a small sign seeing me off. When I lay down, my hand brushed the wedding ring in the suitcase. I closed my eyes and told myself, tomorrow morning, I'm going. No looking back. I didn't dream. I only heard the far-off sound of wind, like the sea whispering the place waiting for me, where I would start again without having to prove anything to anyone. The most beautiful parting, I think, is leaving quietly, no explanations, no blame. Because those who hurt us will never understand the cruelest thing isn't revenge, it's disappearing when they still think you'll always be there. Dawn hadn't broken yet. The first light of day still slept behind the trees. I woke in silence, as if my body knew it was a special day. No alarm, no birds, only the sound of my own breathing, slow and steady. I sat up and gently pulled back the curtain. Outside, the street lay under a film of mist. The yellow streetlights hadn't turned off yet. Everything felt strangely peaceful, as if the world didn't know that in just a few hours an old mother would vanish from the house that once was her heart. I brewed tea, not coffee. I wanted to be clear but light. Steam rose, mint filling the quiet kitchen. I looked around the dining table, the stove, the chair where Edward used to fix his radio, so familiar, so dear, that I knew I had to leave now or I never would. When the clock struck 5 a.m., I opened the safe, took the envelope with the house keys, and sealed it carefully. I wrote one short line on the front, to Mr. Harold. Thank you for helping me close this chapter. I set the envelope on the table beside the small vase I'd arranged the night before, white orchids, my favorite. The hallway light shone across, brightening petals thin as mist. A simple scene, but enough to soften my farewell. I checked the suitcase, compact, worn, holding the rest of my life. Papers, a few clothes, the wedding ring, the photo of me with Edward and Cole when my boy was small. Everything set like a ritual. I drew the zipper. The click echoed in the quiet, like sealing fate. I put on a heavy coat and a knit scarf, then opened my door. The hallway was dark, only a sliver of light slipping from my son's room. Cole's soft snore, Alyssa's faint rustle. I paused, not from doubt, but from an old habit, making sure my loved ones were still sleeping. I didn't open their door. I just stood in the dark, listening to their breathing like a distant tide. Strangely, I felt no anger, only a quiet compassion for the version of me who believed for years that love could heal ingratitude. I looked around the hallway where the family photo still hung, the picture of me, Edward, and Cole at his graduation. In it, I'm smiling. Edward's hand rests on our son's shoulder, and Cole is looking straight at the camera, confident, bright, full of future. I touched the frame lightly, my fingertips trembling. Not from sadness, but from knowing that sometimes the beauty of a memory should only be kept in silence. I walked to the front door. The keys had already been left behind, so the lock was empty now. I tightened my grip on the suitcase handle, took a deep breath, then turned for one last look. The house was dark, except for the hallway light I'd intentionally left on. That light had once been switched off for saving electricity, but today I turned it on not to light my way, but to remind the house that it once belonged to someone who was grateful for every brick. I smiled. Then I gently pulled the door closed. The sound was so soft it was like the last breath of a dream ending. I stood on the porch and drew in a long breath. The cold air rushed into my lungs and made me shiver, but in that chill there was a taste of freedom, the taste of early morning, of beginnings that don't need proof. At the end of the lane, the taxi was waiting. Its yellow lights glowed against the mist, a small halo in the dark. I rolled my suitcase. The wheels clicked lightly over the tiles, a steady tap-tap. Each step was a beat of farewell. I passed the flower bed where Edward once planted lavender he brought back from Tennessee. The bare, dry stems stood patiently through winter, as if they were seeing me off. At the gate, I turned my head once. Not to look, but to remember what it feels like to leave without regret. I didn't see the house, only a blur of mist around it. The hallway light spilled out faintly, like a flame about to go out. I knew once the sun rose, that light would be swallowed. But it didn't matter, what needed to be bright was already bright inside me. I walked to the car, opened the door, and sat down. The driver, a brown-skinned man with a deep voice, glanced back and asked, "Airport, right?" I nodded. "That's right, and please don't look back." He smiled lightly and asked nothing more. The car began to move. Through the window, the little street slid past, rooftops faded, then disappeared into the fog. I rested my hand on the suitcase and felt the warmth of the leather. In my mind, there was no house, no Alyssa, no Cole. Only one thought. Everything worth looking at is ahead. The highway opened up, streetlights dimming as dawn spread. I saw a blush of pink spilling across the horizon, the gentle light I'd waited for years. This time, I didn't have to wait for someone to wake me, didn't have to cook breakfast for anyone, didn't have to fear someone locking my door. I leaned back and let the wind slip in through the window crack. Dew on the glass caught the morning light, sparkling like tiny pieces of freedom. I closed my eyes and listened to the low hum of the engine like a steady heartbeat. A chapter had closed. I didn't know how long I would live in that coastal town, or whether Cole would ever look for me. Maybe it didn't matter anymore. Because for the first time in decades, I didn't belong to anyone, and no one had the right to claim me. As the car crossed the bridge, I saw the sun lift on the far side. Bright light spread across the sky, washing the water below in pink. I smiled. Leaving before dawn might be the gentlest way to end a life of entanglement. No one saw me go, no one sent me off, no one held me back, and I didn't need anyone. The trip began. No looking back. That morning, while I was on a flight headed for the Oregon coast, clouds floating below like cotton on the other side of the country, in the house I once called home, the doorbell rang 3 times. Cole stumbled out of the bedroom, hair messy, eyes still sleepy. Alyssa, wrapped in a robe with a coffee cup in hand, wore a scowl from being woken early. At the door stood a moving crew and a young couple, the man in glasses and a gray shirt, the woman in a beige dress holding a file folder. "Hello, we're the Reeds," the woman said with a gentle smile. "Per attorney Harold Benson's schedule, today is the handover." The living room air froze. Cole's eyes went wide, and Alyssa slammed her cup down so hard coffee splashed onto the wood floor. "Handover of what?" Cole rasped. "This property has completed the transfer," the man replied calmly. "We're the new owners. Here's a notarized copy of the contract." Alyssa snatched the papers and flipped through them quickly. At the bottom, my clean, familiar signature stood out. Lila Whitmore. Below it, the legal stamp with dates matching last week. No one spoke for a few seconds. Only the soft whir of the HVAC and the tick of the clock filled a room beginning to crack. Cole stammered, "No, no way. This is my mother's house. We live here. There must be some mistake." The man with glasses answered evenly, "There's no mistake, sir. The paperwork is valid. The transaction is complete. Attorney Benson confirms all ownership has been transferred. Today is the handover, per the contract." Alyssa's face flushed crimson. She turned to her husband, voice pitching high. "Say something. How is this possible? The house is in your mom's name." Cole went silent. In his head, pieces of memory linked together the calm in my eyes, the long silences, the times I held documents without explaining, and especially that morning I woke early to make coffee and then disappeared. He rushed into the office, opened the laptop, and logged into the bank. The screen lit up. The balance in the account under Lila Whitmore was empty. The transaction history showed a large transfer out with a cold note attached. Final settlement closed. Alyssa ran through the house, yanking drawers, opening the safe. Empty. Nothing left, not even the documents they'd once hidden from me. Everything that mattered, the deed, insurance, certificates, was gone with me. Alyssa's scream echoed down the hall. "Where's the safe? Where is the safe?" Cole stood frozen, staring at the wall where the small safe used to sit, now just a square of lighter dust. His phone started ringing nonstop. An unknown number. He answered, voice shaking. "Hello, this is Cole Whitmore." A calm, professional voice replied, "Hello, I'm the secretary for Attorney Harold Benson. We received your inquiry. I'm calling to confirm all transactions related to the property at 43 Maple Avenue are complete. By law, the home is now owned by Luther Every 43, the Reed family. Mrs. Lila Whitmore was the lawful seller." Cole hung up. In that moment, his world fell apart in silence. The mother he thought only knew how to endure, to stay quiet, had left not with noise or blame, but with a legal signature colder than any anger. Alyssa sank into a chair, hands clutching her head. "The kitchen deposit, $5,000, Cole." "What are we going to do?" Cole didn't answer. He walked to the window and looked out. The movers were carrying the young couple's furniture inside. Each piece crossing the threshold felt like a slap to his pride. He remembered Alyssa mocking me, the night she locked me in the bathroom, the times she said, "This is our house, not hers." Now the house wasn't theirs at all except for me, the one who chose to let it go at the right time. The new owner stepped into the living room and said politely, "We understand your surprise. But the contract is clear. Please arrange to move your belongings within 2 days. If you need more time, we can offer a temporary 2-week rental at a reduced rate." Alyssa turned pale. And Cole, for the first time, was truly silent. Not the detached silence he once used on me, but the silence of someone who realizes he's lost control. Back at the law office, Mr. Harold sent an email with the contract copy attached, and a brief note. "Transaction is legal and irreversible. Any appeals must be filed through official channels. Mrs. Lila Whitmore has not provided contact information. There was no one left to call, no one to plead with. Cole's phone showed dozens of outgoing calls, all to one number. Mine. He called again and again. But on the other end, no one picked up. Only an automated voice, warm but distant. "The number you have dialed is not reachable at this time." Alyssa threw her phone on the table, voice breaking. "She's crazy. She can't do this." Cole answered softly, as if to himself. "She can." And she did. The empty house echoed with their footsteps, the clatter of disturbed things, doors slamming. All those sounds were nothing but background music for their late lesson. Somewhere else, I was sitting on the balcony of a small room overlooking the bay. Noon sunlight winked on the water, gulls circling in flocks. My phone buzzed. Cole's name lit the screen. 1, 2, 3, then 10 calls. I didn't touch it. I let it ring, then fall quiet. In that silence, I heard the waves clearly, gentle and steady. Some apologies only matter when the listener is still there. After they leave, everything is just wind. I sipped my tea and smiled. Not a triumphant smile, but the smile of someone who has taken back control of her life. In the old house, Cole and Alyssa finally dropped onto the floor, exhausted. Alyssa turned on the faucet to wash her hands. Cold water trickled weakly. She twisted the handle to hot, and a small click sounded in the pipes. Such a tiny sound, but it startled them both. Maybe in that instant, they remembered me, the woman once locked in a bathroom, shivering in a wet towel, listening to water drip by the second. And now, every time they turn on the hot water, that click will echo as a reminder that the former controllers have lost control for good. I lifted my head toward the sea, shimmering in the late light, the breeze combing through my silver hair. Everything was settled. No need for revenge, no noise. Sometimes justice is simply leaving at the right time, letting those who remain face the emptiness they created. The coastal town welcomed me with salt on the air and cool wind, a scent only those who have stood at the ocean's edge truly know. The taxi stopped at the top of a gentle slope. Below was a row of white-painted wooden houses, windows thrown open to the morning sun, and at the end of the road, the sea spread out like a giant mirror reflecting the sky. I rolled my suitcase down, its wheels clicked over gravel, a crisp, steady rhythm, like a new breath. The innkeeper, a middle-aged woman with brown hair, a sturdy build, and a kind smile greeted me warmly. "You must be Mrs. Whitmore. Your room's on the second floor, window straight to the bay. I've set out warm blankets and a kettle." The room wasn't large, but it was quiet enough to hear waves breaking on the shore. Cream-painted wood walls, light slipping through white curtains, touching the small table beside the bed. I opened the window and let the wind in, carrying gull cries and the raw tang of salt. On the little wooden table, I placed Edward's photo, the frame I'd brought from the old house. In it, he smiles gently, pale blue eyes shining with the rare patience of a man who's known a lifetime of work and loss. I touched the glass and whispered, "I'm here, Edward. At last, I've learned to stand up on my own." The next morning, sunlight spilled across the wooden floor, sparkling like shards of golden glass. I brewed coffee, not the cheap instant I used to drink, but lightly roasted beans ground fresh. The aroma filled the room and mingled with the sea breeze, a new scent that felt strangely comforting. I went to the fish market at the dock, where sun-browned men hauled nets and rinsed fish under cold water. An old fisherman, hair white as sea foam, smiled at me. "New around here? Want to try halibut or fresh salmon?" I laughed and misnamed a few fish, making him chuckle. The next day, he saved me the best cut and said, "For Mrs. Whitmore, now you know what to pick." Day by day, I learned the names of the fish and the little paths to the beach. I learned to live slower, lighter, freer. In the afternoons, I often sat at the small cafe at the bottom of the hill, the one with the crooked wooden sign that read Sea Breeze Cafe. The owner, a gray-haired woman who tied a red scarf, always saved me the window table. I read the paper, nibbled apple pie, and watched the boats come in. No one knew who I was. No one asked where I came from. And I liked it that way. I hung a small orchid, the only thing I brought from my old house, by the window. When I left, it had only a few wilted leaves. Now, under the sea sun, a fresh green shoot has popped up. I take care of it every day, the way I'm learning to take care of myself again. At night, I shower with warm water as long as I want. No more knocking on the door, no more voices talking about the water bill, no more watchful eyes. I turn on the faucet and let the steam cover my body, feeling the frozen layers inside me being washed away. The water runs warm, steady, unbroken. And I realize the sound of water is no longer the sound of confinement, but the music of freedom. That night, I sat on the balcony with a cup of mint tea. The sea darkened under the moonlight. The waves were steady, soft, but deep. Each wave seemed to whisper something I had forgotten, that loss is not always an ending. Those 2 days locked in the bathroom once felt like a scar in my memory. I thought I'd carry it for life. But now, as I listen to the waves, that pain dissolves like salt in water. I no longer tremble at the thought of a turning lock. I feel calm, because if that door hadn't been locked that day, I might never have dared to step out of a life that bound me. This town is small, but enough for someone to be reborn. Every morning, I greet the newspaper seller, the mail carrier, and the kids biking past. They call me Miss Lila, as if I've lived here forever. No one is overly curious. No one brings up the past. I feel lighter by the day, as if each sea breeze carries away a little more of the old weight. I started keeping a journal. Every night before bed, I write down the small things. Today the sea was bluer than yesterday. Today I smiled a little more. Today I brewed better coffee than the first time. I write for myself, not to tell anyone. Sometimes I turn on a small radio and listen to old songs, the kind that make me remember Edward. Remember when we were young, poor, and happy. I don't cry. I just smile, because in the sound of the waves, I feel like he's right beside me, watching me learn to love life again. One morning, walking along the beach, I saw a little boy building a sandcastle. A wave rolled in and washed it away. Instead of crying, he just looked at it and started again, more carefully. The sight made me stop in my tracks. I realized some things have to collapse before we know we can rebuild them, better and stronger. Whenever I look at the ocean, I see myself in it, gentle and strong, forgiving yet boundaried. I no longer resent Cole or Alyssa. I'm simply grateful to them because they pushed me to my limit, and in doing so, I discovered I could start over at an age when people assume you only wait for rest. At night, I hear the wind press over the wooden roof, and it feels like the whole world is breathing with me. I whisper to myself, half prayer, half affirmation. Leaving isn't running away. Leaving is choosing yourself. And that's exactly it. I've chosen the rest of my life with my own 2 hands. I don't need anyone's forgiveness, anyone's recognition. I only need enough courage to keep walking, enough peace to sleep well, and enough freedom to turn on warm water every morning without fearing a knock at the door. The sea out there is still open, like a door that never locks, and I, the woman once shut in a cold bathroom, have finally found the real key to my life. One early morning, when the sun was still peeking behind the sand dunes, I woke earlier than usual. The wind carried a soft salt scent and the chatter of gulls on the wooden roof. I slipped on a light sweater, poured myself a hot coffee, and stepped onto the porch. In front of me, the ocean stretched in a pale pink of dawn, waves beating gently, like the heartbeat of someone learning to love life again. I sat in the familiar wooden chair and breathed deep. The cold slid into my lungs, then melted into warmth. I remembered it all, the mornings in the old house, Alyssa's sharp footsteps, Cole's cool eyes, the click of the bathroom lock, a sound that haunted me through so many nights. But today, I didn't feel pain. I felt light and grateful, because without those 2 locked days, I wouldn't have had these 2 peaceful years. Without the betrayal, I wouldn't have known freedom. On the windowsill, my orchid is blooming. The white petals, thin as paper, tremble in the early breeze. I set my hand on the frame and whispered, "Edward, do you see? I'm all right. I found myself again." I remembered when we were young, working all week for a simple dinner, but always with laughter. Edward used to say, "If one day I'm not here, live so you're not afraid of anything." I didn't fully understand that until now. I used to fear loneliness, loss, being left behind. But it turns out the scariest thing isn't losing others, it's losing yourself in submission. Now my days are simple and complete. Morning walks on the sand, a small lunch at noon, watering the orchid in the afternoon, reading by the window at night. I've started teaching the neighbor kids how to sew and how to plant. Some days they call me Grandma Lila, and it makes me laugh. I've never had a title that felt so easy. People here are used to the sight of an older woman with silver hair, a gentle smile, and a basket of fresh fish in her hand. No one knows my backstory, and I don't need them to. I've left the past behind not by forgetting, but by setting it down where it belongs. One afternoon I received a postcard without a return address. The handwriting was familiar, a little shaky. It was Cole's. "Mom, I'm sorry. Everything's changed. I understand now." I looked at it for a long time, then tucked it into my journal between two blank pages. I didn't cry. I just smiled. Forgiveness isn't opening the door for someone to come back, it's closing the door that once wounded you. That night, I took another long shower. Warm water ran over my shoulders down to the floor, fogging the mirror. I looked at my reflection, older, more lines, but calmer and more at ease than ever. I murmured, "This old lady finally did it." Outside, the waves kept breaking. I opened the door and let the breeze carry the sound inside. Moonlight fell across my shoulders, soft as an old blanket. In that moment, I knew I was truly free. No big house needed, no recognition, no thunderous revenge, just peace. Just the knowledge that the woman once locked in a bathroom has now unlocked her own life. I wrote the final line in my journal before closing it. Life can take many things from us, but if we still dare to choose ourselves, then we haven't lost anything. Then I set down the pen and blew out the candle, letting the night close softly like a finished chapter. Dawn rose again offshore. I stepped onto the porch, closed my eyes, and let the sea breeze brush my cheeks. Each wrinkle felt like it smiled with the morning light. I knew that from here on, every day is a gift of courage, of freedom, and of myself. And if someone is listening to this story, maybe a mother, a grandmother, or someone who's been hurt, I only want to say this: don't be afraid to leave if staying means losing yourself. Don't be afraid to start over, even late. Dawn always waits, as long as you're brave enough to open the door and step out. I'm grateful you've walked with me to the very end of this journey, every second, every feeling, every breath of this story. If you're listening from a faraway city, maybe New York, Seattle, Houston, or Miami, please leave a hello in the comments. I want to know where you're listening from and what made you stay to the very end. If my story touched you, please like, subscribe, and don't forget to turn on notifications for new journeys from women like me, women who once fell but never gave in. Because with your listening, my story truly lives.